Thanks for coming on, man. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Good to have another conversation.
Yeah, yeah. You're just basically just bringing it from the bar to the podcast room.
With some added cigars on top of it.
Yeah, yeah. I've been getting back into cigars lately for some reason. I don't know why.
For me, it's generally a golfing thing, but that's only the time where it's like social and all of that. Not very many times is it customary
Yeah, yeah.
outside of like a whiskey bar or those sort of
Well, that's
things.
what that's what we're doing. We're drinking
Exactly,
whiskey.
exactly, exactly.
We're smoking
Yeah.
cigars. We're doing a pod.
And we're getting ready to hit into conversation that's gonna be relevant to both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not that we'll be talking about whiskey or
Well,
cigars, but
we could. It does. Actually, I've been looking at whiskey as an investment. Tell you the truth. And who knows? At that point, I mean, there might be a real shortage of whiskey because even now, none of the Japanese distilleries can produce or are selling aged whiskey by the year,
mm,
right? Everything is like a blend now. Macallan, you can't get a new 18-year-old Macallan. You can't get a new 15-year-old Macallan, 20-year-old Macallan because they're all sold out already. And if you are going to get it, you're going to pay premiums, like
mm.
big premiums, right? So I think whiskey could be a good hard investment, like a good alternative investment. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of those classes of alternative investments, whether or not you're talking about whiskey, collectibles. There's a whole range of things. Art falls into it. Wine, as you referenced already. There's a lot of different items out there. Some of them are used because the rules around taxation and things along that line are a little bit easier to play around with. Um, but from a store of value and a potential for appreciation, there's still a lot of merit in whiskey.
Yeah, but I agree. The alternative investments, like I've been doing more research into those recently
Mm,
for a couple of reasons, right? I looked at this website that I thought was interesting called Masterworks, where
mm,
you can buy a share of artwork. Like you can buy a share of a Basquiat or a share of a Picasso or a share of a Banksy. You
mm.
can put in 25,000, 50,000 for a $5 million painting,
Yeah.
right? And they have increased at a higher rate than the S&P by a
Mm.
substantial amount, kind of like Birkin bags,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like the female version, right? Birkin bags, they've gone up higher than the S&P as well.
Mm,
But I'll tell you my theory, right? My theory why I'm looking at these hard alternative collectibles down the road, right? With AI, 20 years from now, jobs are going to be displaced, right? Most likely people are going to be on UBI. A lot of people will be on UBI, right? Um, so people will be comfortable, but at the same time, I feel like AI algorithms are just going to be able to. I don't know what's going to happen to markets
yeah.
because if AI algorithms are going to be able to predict markets, right? What happens at that
Yeah.
point? If the markets are readable by so many different people, how does that affect the market? I don't know. But I have a feeling that collectibles are going to be worth like real hard assets that you can
Mm,
own and have in your house are going to be worth more
yeah.
in this like post AI world.
Yeah, so I think if I was to reframe it, and you start getting into an aspect around the human element
Right.
and things that are not able to be synthesized or replicated or automated away are going to be the places where value remains and value appreciation because you start getting into the scarcity aspect.
That
Because
too.
true human creation ends up becoming more scarce the more automation of AI creation happens. Uh,
You said what I was thinking.
well, I reframed it so that I could make sure that I understood it correctly.
But that's right. That's
Yeah.
that's that's exactly right. That was another aspect of it as well. Yeah. I mean, right, jobs will be displaced by robots and
Mm,
there will be less and less innovation come from the human side and it's almost like there'll be relics of a time past,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, look what's happening now. I mean, video games are like rare video games are selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, like Mario, the original Mario, right? So I can imagine that some of these collectibles will be worth quite a hefty chunk
Yeah.
in the future.
No, I agree, but I to be honest with you, I am excited for what the future holds in regards to AI, automation, what that means for the availability of goods, services, etc. As it should be deflationary. So when you say everyone's going to be on UBI, a universal basic income, it's basically referencing the fact that there may not necessarily be a human job left to accomplish. So how do you actually generate an income? We may or may not get to that point. Unclear, not a future forecaster in regards to that necessary outcome. But what I do think is going to end up happening is that we are going to get to the point to where anything that you desire or want is going to become much more readily available than it has been historically. And that's going to be really interesting, whether you start talking about super positive scenarios or you start going very dark and thinking about the downside, because there's a lot of pathways that it could end up taking.
Yeah, I would say that we're already on that pathway in a sense, as opposed to the past. Whereas in the past, let's talk 20th century, mid 20th century, homes, cars, very affordable
Mm,
at that point in time, but luxuries were out of reach.
mm,
Now we've reached an inflection point in society where luxuries are very affordable. However, housing, vehicles
mm.
are becoming out of reach for certain classes of the population.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're well on our way towards that future that you're talking about.
Mm.
When you look at rents in New York City for a one bedroom apartment, it's like, you know, $4,000, $5,000, whereas in the 1980s you can get that same apartment for like $400 or $500.
Well, that's true, but I think we need to caveat that with a couple of things. So, like, one, there's far too many restrictions in the creation of new housing. Whether you're talking about New York or California or any country, a lot of places have far too much restriction around creating more supply.
Mm,
And if there's not more supply, we're still creating more humans because birth rate is still above replacement rate in a lot of places. And so demand is increasing. So of course price is gonna end up going up. A lot of the raw materials, because unfortunately we still use some things that are where the price is not is still inflationary. um, but if we can remove that, there's no shortage of space still. So, like, because we referenced New York and California, there is an abundance of space. People want to be
mm,
in certain locations, which drives it up. But I come from a middle of nowhere place. There's still plenty of places in order to put an apartment building, a house, etc. Sure, prices have gone up.
mm.
Um,
Well, that's a luxury that America has. I mean, America
mm,
in particular, there is a lot of land compared to our population,
true,
right?
true. Not every place has as much.
Yeah, look at Malaysia. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
Malaysia's got 30 million people, with 33 million people, roughly, 11% of the population of the United States, and the land mass is, 1/50th, I would say. So
True, but
here, land.
it's still an abundance of space. So
Mm.
there's not really a shortage of places to put new housing. So there's not a over congestion. Whereas
Okay.
if you think about like a country like a Japan or a
Uh-huh.
Singapore,
Oh yeah.
that's where space is at a much greater premium.
Funny you bring up Japan, because while space is at a premium, their population is at a decline, right? So
Mm,
now there are so many houses there for sale that are so cheap. I mean, I see me and my wife have actually discussed looking at buying something there, because you can buy homes for less than $100,000 out on the outskirts of Tokyo that are like
mm.
3 bedroom, 1 bathroom.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the funny thing about Japan, though, is that there's a very minimum number of bathrooms.
yeah,
So
yeah.
here you get 4 bedroom, 4 bathroom. There you get 4 bathroom, four bedroom,
Every
one
bedroom
bathroom.
has a bathroom
Yeah, yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Here there's one
Plus a
bathroom for
couple
the whole,
extras.
and there's one bathroom for the whole house.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Kind of like old school American homes. I feel
yeah,
like
yeah,
that's how it was, and we were discussing why that is.
yeah.
Probably because plumbing was expensive to put in back in the day.
Sure, sure.
So they minimized it.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a rural area, but we were one of the first houses that was like a non-farm
Mm.
house, right? There was one bathroom that was for the master bedroom, which is where the parents will live, and then there's one bathroom for everyone else.
Yeah,
And
typical
that's
American
yeah, yeah,
style.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of the standard. I mean, we had an upstairs and a downstairs, so that we had technically three bathrooms,
Mm.
two and a half. because no shower in the downstairs one.
Right.
But that was actually, more than
We
typical.
made it work, and we
Yeah,
made
yeah,
it work. You just had to share with your siblings.
yeah. Which
Right.
would lead to some confrontations
Yeah.
occasionally.
All right, so you know what, we kind of went on a bit of a rant there, but being that you talked about where you came from in your home, why don't you give us a little background on yourself? Let the audience know who you are, where you're from. I mean, obviously, we know you've got this venture firm,
Yeah, yeah,
Indelible Ventures, but investing in Southeast Asian companies. But
yeah,
let's dig a little deeper. Why don't you tell us the Kevin Brockland story?
So tracing all the way back, as I mentioned, I'm from a rural place. I'm from kind of middle of nowhere, Missouri, outside of St. Louis. At one point, it was the fastest growing county in the country. Um,
When
we
was
w-
that?
we were one of the first subdivisions, suburban style subdivisions in that area.
Okay,
Which was part of the suburban sprawl where people just kept on moving westward away from the city, and
right,
you started seeing a lot of development. But in the early days, it's long drive to get to school, super long drive in order to get to a grocery store. Everything was very spread out.
okay.
So as a little kid, walking through the woods, capturing small animals in the creek and this and that was kind of my typical day. Not very many other people around, so not a lot of other like kids in the neighborhood riding bikes and all of that because it's pretty isolated.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, fast forward, made it out of there. Not very many people escaped the what I used to call the lovingly referred to as the state of misery,
okay,
even though
okay.
it's technically pronounced Missouri.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and ended up getting out of there. Moved did my last year of university and went to Europe and basically stuck with the travel bug.
Uh-huh.
Came back to the U.S. for a bit of time. Worked on Wall Street, hated it. Got a job with Tiger Capital. Private assets started becoming a little bit more of what I liked. But that was doing distressed assets during the financial crisis, 2008. And then I just moved earlier and earlier stage and more international. Um, and what brought me out to Malaysia, because I've now been in Malaysia for about 8 years,
Right.
the longest I've been in one place since my childhood home.
You know what? It's funny you say that. This is the longest I've ever been in one place. 16 years in Malaysia. I've never lived anywhere. I mean, I lived in New York,
Mm,
until I was 26, but different places around New York, not
mm,
the same city.
yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
This is the same city,
yeah,
16 years, 8 years.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's something about it that just keeps you here.
Yeah, I mean, I moved apartments here in KL one time,
Mm,
but for the most part, it's still same city,
yeah.
and that's the longest in one place. It's kind of surprising because for a while after I got out of grad school, I was basically moving every year or two,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
constantly, whether inside of New York, DC. I lived in Mexico, I lived in Peru, I've lived in a number of different places. Um, and yeah, people keep on asking me like, when are you gonna end up like switching locations again? But it's a very comfortable place, and I travel a lot, so.
It is one of the hidden gems.
Mm.
Okay, so you made it here. All right. I mean, this is funny, right? But you work for Tiger Capital, but you wouldn't be so technically you could be one of the Cubs of Tiger Capital, right? Because he's known for having that. I mean, albeit maybe you're in the embryo stage, but you've got your fund here.
Yeah, yeah. So I launched my own fund here after I spent the first 5 years working for another fund. It was a global fund.
Okay.
I was originally supposed to run Latin America, which I did. I was living in Mexico at the time. Um, switched over here because the person that was running Asia went on maternity leave. I had global role, so I knew the region.
Okay.
Um, and then just never came back. So for a year straight, I was running LATAM, I was running Asia.
Oh,
Complete opposite, flip the AM PM. It's a 24-hour job essentially.
it's basically the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, yeah. So I switch over to here, and then after 5 years, I see a common theme amongst all of the Southeast Asian countries, which is a lot of the early stage capital, the funds that were really investing in seed stage across the region, they were victims of their own success, which meaning that they were able to raise larger and larger funds. So writing the smallest check sizes no longer made sense.
Mm,
Now they want to write bigger size checks because they have bigger size funds, and it created a bigger gap at the very early stage.
right.
Now, in some of the more mature ecosystems like a Singapore, not that dramatic of a consequence because you have a very strong angel network.
Mm,
But Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, some of these other markets, they don't have as a robust activity of angels. They exist, but it's not as robust. And you didn't have the concentration of the remaining VCs that were actually still there and able to do things. And so I saw that opportunity along with seeing the kind of turning point that the markets were taking as well, which is companies across this region are not very heavily digitalized.
mm,
A lot of things are operating in a not old fashioned, but a little bit more manual than the current technology should suggest. And part of that is because the majority of the businesses are still family run or family controlled,
mm,
and they're cash flow positive. So if it's not broke, why fix it? Why change anything and have an impact on the moneymaker?
mm.
A lot of these businesses are basically having your own personal ATM. They just keep on cranking out cash for you. So why change it? But what's going on, and when I say a turning point, is that a lot of these companies are starting to transition generations. So the older generation is starting to put more control into the next generation's hands. Sometimes it's like first child, sometimes it's segmented amongst the children to do different parts of it. But there's a transition of power that's happening. And oftentimes that's going along with that is that you're seeing them want to take their stamp because they were educated in the top universities globally. They have the finest education that money can buy. And they do want to create the leader of the global standard in regards to the operation. Often, now mind you, sometimes you get the ones that talk about the stigma of the third generation and they don't want to do anything because
Right.
they don't want to do the third generation curse.
But you're talking
Uh,
about you're talking about like established companies, right? Are you
we're
writing
not
checks for established
we're not
companies?
doing anything on established companies.
Okay.
What I'm saying is
Okay.
what I'm more referring to is that we have this aspect where the big established companies
Mm,
are now starting to digitalize,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of the Western tech
Mm,
doesn't put enough effort into localizing their go-to-market strategy across Southeast Asia.
right.
So
Okay.
there's a big opportunity for locally developed, created tech
Mm,
that is solving similar pain points, but localized to this region,
right.
leveraging on the cost advantage that we have to price, to go to market, etc. And we can actually end up creating global products as well,
Mm.
leveraging that exact same cost advantage. We still have really incredible talent that's globally competitive, and so a lot of the barriers have started coming down, including local adoption and the ability to go global.
All right. So essentially, you're honing in on the ancillary companies that are building products to feed these generational companies and help them transition into the digital world. Is that kind of what you're seeing? Like for example, you've got the established companies, you've got the YTL, the
Sure.
IGB, the big boys
Yeah.
in the region, and then you've got these smaller AI startups or
Mm.
whatever that are building products that can help those companies transition. Who's to say that they're not already
Yeah. Yeah.
transitioned and they don't have their own?
Mm.
But I'm sure there's a lot of even smaller companies in that are in the, small cap range that could benefit from these small startup companies.
Yeah. 100% on that. So like a lot of these companies, big, small, mid-size, etc. There's a lot of opportunity across the gamut of
Mm,
companies that are operating here. Many of the really, really big ones, the
yeah,
giant conglomerates, they're large enough to have some of their own teams.
right.
But the interesting thing is, when it comes to tech, even large companies look at themselves and realize what's a scale problem that's worth my resources versus what's not a scale problem. Now, if you think about that in terms of how many headcount does it require for me to build my own solution versus how much would it cost me to just buy it?
Mm.
So if I can buy a solution for 5,000 US dollar per annum or build it for 3 headcount, which am I going to do?
Yeah.
Which ought I do? I mean, some companies will try and build a lot of their own. The problem when a lot of companies try and build their own is, so let's take a CRM, which is a common technology. Most people have some form implemented. If you're using a CRM system and you try
For
and
those who don't know, why don't you tell them what CRM stands for?
yeah, it's basically customer relation management. So it's like a database to manage your customers. So it
Right.
has a lot of the data points around your interactions with them, where they sit in your pipeline, and there's a lot of features that can go along with it,
Mm.
depending upon your vertical and
Mm.
what kind of company you are. But most companies have some form,
Right.
whether it's manual Excel spreadsheets, those sort of things, or if they actually are buying a proper software. So if you think about that, and you're hiring a sales team and you've built your own CRM, you hire a person, that person is now going to have to learn a brand new system that they've never used before. It's going to take them a while. There's a learning curve. Whereas if you're using kind of industry standard option 1 through 10,
Mm.
there's very little learning curve because it's common systems. And so, as well, that person, you come in and get them trained on your system, they're not going to stay with you for life.
Mm.
These days, nobody stays with companies for life.
Mm.
That to hire somebody, they also want to see that you're using something that can end up keeping them with relevant skill sets for wherever they end up going.
But
So
what
there's
about
an
cutting employees also?
cutting employees is also an aspect because a lot of the automation is going to end up doing that.
Mm.
But I think the when talking about that topic, well, the reference point that I usually use because I come from finance industry is investment bankers.
Mm.
For as long as I can remember, investment bankers have always been the stereotypical longest hours you could possibly imagine of any industry, and it's always been the sort of like from sunrise to sunset and beyond. Um, and that
Yeah.
was the way that it was in the 80s. And then personal computers came along, gave us a whole lot of efficiency, and then mobile devices, etc. Flash forward to today, what are the hours of an investment banker? Still basically the same, where
Mm.
they figured out more work to do. And I use that as an example because it's more relevant to my personal experience. But in general, there's transitional phases with new technologies. But the interesting thing is that humans are very creative in figuring out more work to do.
Mm.
And so this kind of comes back to the point about UBI is I don't know whether or not there may be a future where we've run out of ideas and everything is automated, but I hesitate because human creativity always figures out more
Yeah,
stuff to
that's not going to
do,
happen. I don't want to hear
you
that.
know?
The people have been saying that for hundreds of years. I remember
Yeah.
there's a quote from a patent officer in like the 1890s saying everything that can be invented has
Has
been
been.
invented,
Yeah.
right? Like no,
Never.
not going to
Yeah.
happen. We don't know
Now,
anything
who's
about
doing the
this.
inventing is going to be a different story in the
Right.
future, but
But there will be. This is something that we've talked about, like post AI, post UBI world. Like imagine what's the world going to look like, right?
hmm,
Is there going to be money? I mean, in down the future, if a human being has all of their needs met,
yeah.
food, shelter, luxury, right,
Yeah,
provided
yeah.
for them, do you even need money, or do you switch to some sort of other system? Most likely, what would happen is a war first,
Yeah.
and then out of the ashes would be some sort of a new system that's created, whereas ideas could be currency and like leadership could be currency, right? Like it reminds me of the old West when we were driving west and there were occasionally a white man would get abducted by the Native Americans and they would hold them captive. And sometimes, most of the time, once these people got let go, they experienced Stockholm syndrome to a serious degree because these
Mm.
Indians, these Native Americans, we're living in a truly free society, a society that might have been savage and it might have been ruthless, whereas they would just go on warring parties and kill the
Mm.
other tribe. But regardless, they were free,
Yeah.
right? They had all of their food needs met with buffalo. They essentially were nomadic, living in teepees, transitioning with the system, with the seasons, excuse
Mm.
me. And post interviewing a lot of these captives, who some of them ended up, you know, going native, so to say, or
Mm.
adapting to the culture. They always said that it was an amazing feeling to not have these restrictions and these laws and live that freedom. And I because I read this book about the Comanche, right, and how they won the West, and how eventually we won the West from them with the
Mm.
pistol, essentially with the pistol,
Yep.
right? But but the way society worked was there would be most likely a male, and he would go throughout the tribe and try to create a raiding party. And he would go from his tribe, and then he would gather his men and go to another tribe and raid that tribe. You know,
Yeah.
they'd kill people, they'd steal their
Yeah.
horses, they'd take their buffaloes, take their women, right? But the idea was that the better men, the man with the idea, the man with the plan, would be able to build a bigger party and was the most successful raider, right? So if you were just like, if you said, "Oh, we're just going to go raid them," people would be like, "Who are you? Why are we going to follow you?" But if
Yeah.
he said, "Oh, we're going to have 10 horses, we're going to flank them on the left, we're going to cross the stream here, you know, we're going to take out their teepees first, we're going to burn this part down,"
Mm.
that guy became a successful raider and probably eventually a chief, right? Because his idea was the most thought out, it was the most
Mm.
well planned. And that's a society without money. Leaders are created through ideas and planning and execution, right?
Mm.
Which is kind of like entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
Like the best entrepreneurs end up having the best plans. They can pivot out of their way
Mm.
from a bad product
Yeah.
and create something new, and they're able to foster that community within their company, right? So imagine a world like that.
But in theory, the accumulation of money should be based upon, again, in theory, the
Right.
accumulation of money should be based upon the same sort of logic in regards to who has the best plan, innovation, execution of said plan and idea. Where some of it is deviated is when you start getting into systems that are rent-seeking, cronyism, corruption, etc., that create classes of those same that basically
I would agree.
differentiate
I would agree, but
as
I agree. I hear what you're
yeah, yeah,
saying,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I want to build on that because there's more to it than that.
Sure.
Because in a capitalist society, or a society based on money, you also look. Let's face it. Entrepreneurs are builders, right? They build products, but it's supposed to be what value you bring to society,
Yeah.
right? That is supposed to be the most wealthy people.
Mm.
The people that create the best company should bring
In
the most
theory.
value to
Yeah,
society.
yeah, yeah. In theory, yeah.
However, we've got bankers,
Yeah.
right? And there's trading desks that all
Mm.
they do is their job exists to make nothing but more money. And they're
Correct.
not really bringing any value to greater society. They're simply just creating money out of nowhere, right? Or advertisers
Yeah.
or marketing, who are marketing
Yeah.
shit products that you don't need,
This is
right?
this is true, but now you got to start talking about the functional necessity of these sort of roles to where advertisers is an easier functional one because the challenge of bringing a product to market starts with getting the awareness that that product even exists.
I hear you.
So the relevancy of advertising is built around, can you get awareness and drive that awareness to the point of wanting to engage? From there on, it's, is the product actually good? Bankers, make an inordinate amount of money, and we can argue whether or not the sum is is equivalent to what they actually bring to the table. But there is a necessity in order to be able to move capital and allocate the resources of that capital, because for the most part it's not necessarily the capital of those bankers, it's other people's money that's entrusting it to those bankers so that they can get a return on investment. So think about your pensioner that has the retirement savings somewhere, and that banker is helping reallocate that resource to this company, that company, an innovative company that's a little bit more high risk but could be really interesting. And so every country has pension funds,
Mm,
has
mm.
sovereign wealth funds,
Yeah.
has all of these different things, and down to the individual level. And for the most part, it's not those individuals or those institutions that are managing it themselves. It comes to the
I
bankers.
would argue that yes. Look,
Now, mind you, I am a finance person, so maybe I'm talking my own book by trying to save the relevancy of
we'll
my.
get to your book. We'll get to your book later. We'll get to your book later. But in a society that does, where money actually runs. Look, we're always going to need money because we're going to need a system of trade, right?
Yeah,
The money facilitates trade. However,
yeah,
I find that bankers
yeah.
are well overcompensated
Overcome. I agree. I
to a
agree on
to a
that.
point to a point where they are sucking our best and our brightest into the banking system, whereas the rest of society is actually being deprived of the
Mm,
best minds because they're being paid the best in the
yeah,
finance
yeah,
industry.
yeah.
Whereas, there's a great line in a movie called Margin Call
I.
where the guy gets fired and he says, I used to build bridges.
Mm,
And now I just analyze numbers to make more money.
yeah.
I used to build bridges that people used to pass by, and
Mm,
that made sense. There was a
yeah, yeah,
value to that, right? And that was obviously post 2008.
yeah,
But it hasn't changed in a sense, whereas bankers still make a ton of money. And I'm not saying that people aren't entitled to money, but
yeah,
we need those minds to build a better world,
yeah,
not
yeah.
just to make more money. And people would argue, oh, but you need more money to build a better world. But we
Yeah.
need to we need to change our value system, perhaps.
I don't disagree with that,
Mm,
but there is from the individual perspective, there's a rationality to where if you're paying for an education or if you have a skill set, you're gonna find you're generally gonna either find the place that gives you the highest reward. Um, and what that reward is gonna depend upon the value system of the individual of whether or not it's pure compensation, and finance industry is very well compensated, or you're going to go something else. Entrepreneurship can end up being extremely lucrative. If you look at the list of the highest wealth individuals, a lot of that came from entrepreneurship. Now, some of it is now getting to the point. I think one of the statistics recently was that the majority of billionaires were inherited
inheritance,
billionaires as
right?
opposed to. So that ends up becoming a little bit of a differentiation there. But there is a high reward outcome of pursuing it, but it is very, very difficult. So if we think about the opportunity cost and the comfort level associated with it, if I can come out and get a job with a hedge fund or otherwise that's going to pay me $500,000 a year plus bonus,
Mm.
or I could risk it and try
No, I
and
don't
build
blame
something.
them.
It's tough.
I don't
It's
blame them. They're
tough.
taking advantage of the system. I don't
Mm,
blame them. I mean, and to be fair, right, you're right, 100% about the billionaires. Most of them are inherited wealth. Then there's entrepreneurs, there's bankers, and there's real estate magnates.
yeah,
That's the
the
primary
majority.
class of
Yeah, yeah,
billionaires, right?
yeah,
But I would also argue that particularly in Southeast Asia, a large portion of the entrepreneurs also come from the ruling class. And maybe across the
it's true.
world.
It's true. It's true.
And that's because they have the means. It's a big risk to be an entrepreneur. And
And
these
they
guys
have
have the
safety
means,
nets.
they have a safety net, whereas they can take more than one shot.
Yeah,
Business fails, they can take a second shot,
yeah,
they can
yeah,
take a third shot. So it's getting more and more rare to hear about that man who came from zero to hero.
yeah.
But it's out there, and I tell you, those guys that do it, they are something special. They're people that really, those are change
Yeah,
makers.
yeah, yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, to be honest with you, some of the entrepreneurs that I respect the most, or who are among some of the wealthiest, they created their own wealth, but they did not exactly come from hard circumstances. They had the safety net. Jeff Bezos was not exactly hurting. Mark Zuckerberg was not hurting. Elon Musk was not
if we're
hurting. You
talking
know,
Southeast Asia, Anthony Tan came from one of the wealthiest families in
exactly,
Malaysia.
exactly. You go through the entirety of the list. You know,
Mm.
it all
You
that's
can't
a
take credit away from because they still built a great
they
business.
built better than their
Right, than their
the
peers.
the generation prior, so
Yeah.
they built even better than what preceded them. So nothing against them, but it is kind of the
Right.
natural evolution of ecosystems, is that your first tier of entrepreneurs are going to be the ones that can endure the risk, to where if it fails, and the probability is that it will, you have something to fall back on. They're like, everybody, when you go into entrepreneurship, you need to go with with the mentality of burn the boats. But the reality
Hindsight.
is that there does need to actually be a plan B. You need to act like there's not.
Mm.
But
That's why also the best guys know how to pivot. If
mm,
their original product doesn't work,
exactly.
they can pivot into a secondary
Yeah.
product that they could then raise additional capital for.
And every company has a pivot.
Mm.
Every major successful company has some form of pivot. It may be extreme or it may not be extreme. You look at like Slack, where it was communication for gaming, or if you look at like YouTube, or if you look at like, you go through the laundry list of ones,
Mhm.
and you know, it's everybody pivots.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Mm,
Couldn't agree more. So, all right, why don't we delve into your book a little bit? Let's talk Southeast Asian startups. You know, what do you're obviously looking to
mm.
be first guy in, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
want to write the small checks. You want to kind of like mentor these
yeah.
founders. So, what are you interested in? What pond are you swimming in this realm?
Yeah. So I mean, the companies that we look for. So first off, we're solely B2B tech. We're not doing anything in the consumer space. Solely B2B tech, and we're only interested in companies where there's an international play. Now, that international play can be regional or it can be global. Ideally global, but not everything necessarily has to be. A lot of it ends up coming down to what's the size of the market that we're going after, and is the regional market big enough or sufficient enough? So normally when I look at the companies that we're in, you either have your default global or your regional plus is kind of the way that I describe them. But I'm really interested in companies that are solving real tangible problems, have clear positive unit economics, and actually have more of the bootstrapper mentality.
Mm,
I think in Southeast Asia, the big thing is that funding is relatively scarce.
mm,
We don't have a lot of depth in the capital stock. We have a lot of capital
mm,
in Southeast Asia. There's no shortage of money actually in Southeast Asia. We just got done talking about how much wealth there is,
mm,
but it generally doesn't go into innovation and technology, etc.
mm.
If I wanted to build a new yeah, apartment complex or condo
Right.
complex, there seems to be no shortage of willingness, even though there's an excess of supply.
Well, also maybe it's the you know, it's the infrastructure in a sense, the startup infrastructure, right? Like something that I hear from a lot of local entrepreneurs, not local entrepreneurs, not local investors, is that when they go to visit the U.S., they see that the academic infrastructure and how it's integrated into the entrepreneurship
Yeah.
infrastructure, where you get financing into academia to
Mm,
try some higher risk startups in terms of laboratories, and you can
yeah,
utilize,
yeah.
you know, so you have the university system kind of
Mm,
intertwined into the VC game, and we don't really have that here
yeah.
either, right?
We don't. I mean, so like to be honest with you, the archetype of the founders that we usually back
Mm,
are come with some sort of international exposure, and that may end up being the expat founder, which you know they're coming with international exposure, or for the locals that we do out of Southeast Asia, it's generally like lived abroad, worked abroad, studied abroad, spent a considerable amount of time abroad. And a lot of that ends up coming around to the fact that it just changes the lens and it changes the perspective that they bring when they're assessing and analyzing problems. But when you talk about the structural aspects of the system and are we encouraging entrepreneurship, I would definitely say no, which is unusual because the majority of the economy is made up of small and micro enterprises, which are entrepreneurial at their core. But if you go around and you talk to any sort of like the child of somebody that built their own business, what are they being encouraged towards? Corporate life.
accountant, lawyer,
Yeah,
doctor.
fundamental roles that are not entrepreneurship that are going into corporate life. They're being encouraged to go and be an employee, which is unusual because it's a complete contrast.
Right.
And maybe it's an aspect of, I don't want you to go through the same pain I went through it so you don't have to, but there's a number of sort of possibilities. But then you start getting into the educational system as well. And the educational system in markets that have stronger startup ecosystems generally encourage a lot more trial and error, and they embrace the failure that goes around with, entrepreneurship is just a big science experiment. It's hypothesis testing. And so there's a culture around that exact same mentality in regards to trial and error. And it's okay to get an error because now you learned what not to do. Uh,
Yeah, no, exactly what you're talking about. There's a book I have right there. It's called Asian Godfathers. I,
mm,
I think it's kind of a must read for anybody who's coming to Asia. But they talk about some of the older immigrant populations in Southeast Asia,
mm,
like the Indians and the Chinese,
yeah,
you had the Chinese diaspora that came
mm,
here, 100 years ago, a couple of 100 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
You had the Indians that the British brought over primarily to help build infrastructure. And in that book, they equate it to the Jewish population in Europe and in North America,
Mm,
whereas they were never part of the native society,
mm,
and they had to become entrepreneurs, and then essentially were fostered to becoming accountants
yeah.
and lawyers and doctors
Mhm,
within the societies that they grew up in. And it's funny because this is a society built on SMEs, like you said, and now we're starting to lose that. Like particularly with the hawker stalls,
mm.
you've got great food coming out of Southeast
Yeah,
Asia.
yeah,
These
yeah.
super small hawker stalls that
Yeah.
that put their families through
Yeah,
foreign
yeah.
colleges, London, the United States, and
Mm,
now those kids are going off and becoming these lawyers and doctors, and
yeah.
and and we're losing that essence of the culture.
We're gonna lose that food culture because who's gonna actually be able to make it now?
Yeah, and I'd hate for it to become like a US where everything is a giant franchise, big box store, and you lose that
And
like single
extremely
individual
unhealthy as
business.
well. Like
Right.
the food culture in the US is not very positive in regards to
Yeah,
the
exactly. It's all
manufacturer
about
state.
capitalism, efficiency, how can we make this more
Mm.
affordable? Whereas you go to Japan, and that's the one place that
The food's
hasn't
great.
lost it is
Yeah, yeah,
Japan.
yeah,
Japan, they take pride in the little things. There are
yeah.
so many solopreneurs and
Mm,
two or three SME businesses that have one-star Michelin restaurants, or even, anything. It could be a knife manufacturer, or it
yeah,
could
yeah.
be, it could be a guy selling sushi, standing sushi on the side. But in Japan, you see that they take pride in their work, and there is a
Even the
pride to it.
non-entrepreneur as well,
Mm.
the cook that may be working in somebody else's restaurant takes pride in their own
In
output.
what they do. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's important, man. That's important. Take pride in your work. Become a perfectionist, I
Yeah,
think.
I
And
love Japan for food.
oh, it's the
Yeah,
best. So you were just there. I was just
yeah,
there.
yeah. And
It's
I'm heading
it's
back here shortly.
nice. There,
Mm,
yeah. I mean, frankly, I think Malaysia actually has one of the best Japanese food scenes in the world outside of Japan, and at the best value for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, you can go here. There's so many omakases. You can go
yeah,
here,
yeah,
300 ringgit, 400 ringgit. I know that might
yeah.
sound expensive to a lot of people, but compared to the
Compared to what you would
U.S. or
pay there,
Japan, forget
yeah,
it. It's a
yeah, yeah,
third of the
yeah.
price.
It's a significant discount to what you would pay in
Yeah,
another
and you're
place.
getting it
More
made
than the food here, though. Yeah,
exactly, and you're getting it made by a Japanese expat
yeah,
who's here as a chef because
yeah,
they want to travel, they want to get out,
yeah,
and it's not that far. It's like a 6 hour flight,
yeah.
so you do have a lot of really good Japanese chefs here.
There's a really interesting opportunity to flip back onto the tech side
Mm,
is that one of the things that I'm seeing right now is that there's a big opportunity for creating more of a bridge between Japan and Southeast Asia.
mm.
A lot of the Japanese corporates are expressing a significant amount of interest. They already have a very large presence across Southeast Asia, but they're expressing a significant amount of additional interest because it's one of the growth areas. The Southeast Asia economy is going to grow. But as that happens, there's an opportunity for locally developed tech to be able to serve the Japanese market as well. And it also can potentially provide exit outcomes to where those larger Japanese corporates that oftentimes are cash rich have the interest and willingness to acquire and tuck in some of the technology creators that we have here.
Yeah, when I sold my restaurant business, we were obviously exploring different avenues, and there were Japanese buyers that were
Mm,
circling, and they bought one of a they bought a few F&B groups out of KL quite a good valuation.
Yeah.
So I'm aware, and from my own experience, I'm aware of them being here to acquire companies,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least majority stake in companies, and help them grow and foster it.
Yeah. We have a few things to announce, but not publicly yet. So hopefully within the near term, I'll be able to actually come out publicly. But there's a
Okay.
lot of interest within our own portfolio of companies coming out of Japan that are expressing significant amount of interest.
Mm.
And I'm hoping as I start doing a lot more travel, I'm speaking at a tech conference there coming up shortly, to draw a lot more of a bridge
All right.
within Southeast Asia and outside of the standard destinations. I mean, Malaysia is not one of the standard investment destinations. If you think about people that are coming from outside of the region, generally speaking, a lot of the capital flow is still going into Singapore. And if you're thinking about VC and tech, it's Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam. We're down on the list,
Mm.
but where we look at Indelible, we're Malaysia, Thailand. We'll invest across Southeast Asia, but Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines, I believe, from a B2B tech standpoint, are the underappreciated destinations that have very large potential. And I think that message is resonating the more and more I put it out there.
Okay, talking about your portfolio, why don't we tell me about some of these companies? Maybe I want to get in on Series A or Series B. What are you cooking up there? Who have you invested in? What kind of companies? Let's talk them up. I want to hear about them.
Yeah, we've got tons of interesting ones. We have companies that are.
Who do you want to shout out?
I'll
I
shout
know
out.
you've invested in a
I'll
lot.
go through the list of every company if I'm afforded the time. Don't get me wrong. I can talk about them all day every day. Um, but I'll do a couple of the more recent ones.
Okay.
So we invested in a company that is doing image recognition technology,
Okay.
basically being able to analyze the images coming from CCTV cameras, etc., so
Mm,
that they can automate the monitoring and prevention of health and safety inside of job sites, like a manufacturing site, chemical plants, distribution centers. Now, if you think about all these locations, or if you think about like a food company, you need to make sure that everybody is wearing protective equipment. If anything goes wrong, you want to have a full visual audit that goes through and traces every single step of that process along the way. You want to avoid any sort of workplace injuries, which can be an entirely damaging from a cost standpoint and otherwise. You want to make sure that you don't have downtime because of damage to equipment. If you're a chemical plant, you want to make sure that there's no leakages. A lot of these things that require they used to require human inspection of a person with a clipboard walking around inspecting, making sure that everything is all right. You got eyes 24/7. All you need is the technology in order to enable it. And so now they're doing quite well. They've got deployments across the globe and is a technology that I think has huge potential.
sounds like something out of like Chinese Shenzhen, like facial recognition, monitoring your citizens, but in a sense, this would be corporate citizens, right?
Yeah,
Corporate employees.
yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily getting to the privacy sensitive of trying to check to whether or not they're clocking in and all of that. So
Mm,
we're not necessarily going after that segment
mm,
because those become very complicated from a regulatory standpoint in regards to that level of monitoring on the individual level.
mm,
What I'm more interested when I look at them is avoidance of downtime, avoidance of problems, eliminating headcount and creating cost savings, and basically having an insurance policy that if anything goes wrong, you can trace the full process back.
mm,
Because if you think about, let's take a hypothetical scenario in a pharmaceutical,
mm,
and there's a realization that there was some level of contamination, right? Historically, you'd have to shut everything down and just recall everything because you don't know the specifics around batch. You may be able to trace it back to the batch, but then you don't know whether or not it could end up causing anything else.
mm.
You can actually retrace the visual on everything, compare that to the rest of your records, and be able to isolate the necessary impact. When you start talking about workplace injuries, one of the primary places of workplace injuries is with forklifts. Just driving those things around, people get quite reckless.
Mm.
Now, you can actually monitor and prevent that to avoid that from happening so that now you can avoid those worker compensation cases
How
because
do
of
you
that.
prevent it? How do you prevent? I understand the monitoring part, and I
Yeah.
understood that when you said it the first time, like with people wearing PPE and all that stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
how do you prevent it? Like the camera can certainly make it aware
Yeah,
that someone's not wearing gloves
yeah,
or somebody's driving too fast,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But how do you prevent that?
So you got a couple of options depending upon the level of sophistication and the pathway that you want to take. And this oftentimes comes down to the customer standpoint.
Mm.
And the company can talk much better about it than I
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
But from a couple of high level aspects of it, if you wanted to put a an automated notification over the speakers inside of the place that just shut it down, you can have something that shouts out that individual and calls them out directly. You can have something that tosses out a push notification to the mobile device of the floor supervisor to where he stops them. You could have something that ends up triggering the IoT device that's sitting on that forklift that just shuts it down.
Wow.
You can do a lot of different things depending upon
So
where
this
you want to actually
system,
take that.
so this system
But
is
it
not only a
starts with
monitoring,
the
but it can also integrate with other
you
technologies.
you can
Wow,
in the long
that's
run. Yeah.
fascinating. What's the name of this company?
That one is a company called Kinetics Pro.
Connecticut, and based out of where?
So it's a Malaysian guy that's based out of Singapore. His business development guy is based out of Thailand.
Okay, yeah.
Mm,
So they're already kind of a regional company.
yeah, global. They have deployments in the Western Hemisphere as well.
It's interesting. It almost because when I think of real world AI, kind of like this, obviously I think of Tesla, right? Tesla's
Mm,
kind of the leader in terms of real world AI, data capture as far as I'm concerned. I mean,
yeah,
they've got, hundreds of
sensors
millions
and
or
all. Yeah,
billions.
yeah,
Right. And that's for navigating robots, navigating cars. But
yeah,
this is kind of in that same vein,
yeah,
which is real interesting. So I imagine then that the system is continuously learning as
yeah.
well as it's deployed.
Yeah, exactly. And it actually becomes more efficient for them to deploy over time because if you think about it,
Mm.
you have to train the model on the image recognition that you want.
Uh-huh.
As your data set becomes bigger and as some of the other tech libraries that are open source or otherwise, you end up becoming much more efficient, which means that you can also increase accuracy and handle much more edge cases.
Mm.
And so, for example, how can you differentiate between a leak in the roof and a leak from the pipe? That starts getting into some of the more complicated
Yeah.
sophistication of the model.
Yeah.
When you start getting into these aspects, one of the things that's really interested on them when I talk about forklift, your typical when you start thinking about your CCTV camera, it's two-dimensional, but
Mm.
you can actually stitch together multiple of the cameras to create the 3D model to where now you have a better ability to actually start ring fencing and having these zones of say a 30 centimeters from the edge or 50 centimeters, half a meter, whatever sort of like
Yeah.
range bound
Yeah. Yeah.
to where now you can set up the specifics of the trigger.
Yeah.
The more that they deploy, the more efficient that they become in being able to
No,
deploy.
this is really interesting. It reminds me of I just listened to a podcast with Palmer Luckey. He was on the Sean
Ah,
Ryan
yeah,
show,
yeah.
right? And he was talking about this lattice system that he
Mm,
has, which is essentially AI software that integrates with a soldier and integrates with all the soldiers on the entire
mm,
battlefield, right? So I imagine this is kind of like that, except in the corporate sense,
yeah,
whereas initially you start with with the CCTV, but you could eventually integrate it into all aspects of
yeah,
the
yeah,
company. So whereas everything is communicating with everything, and you can get a real 10,000 foot
yeah,
view
yeah,
of what's happening in that
yeah,
location at
yeah,
any time. That's
yeah.
real interesting.
Another one of our companies,
Mm,
they were creating fully autonomous retail outlets. Now, hard to get that in mass adoption for a number of reasons, but essentially they broke it down into the individual components of that tech stack that enables autonomous stores. And they're focusing on a single layer as their entry point into the market. That's facial recognition payments. significant amount of computational difficulty goes into that,
Yeah.
especially when you start thinking about how do you game the system when it comes to facial recognition? What's going to stop me from just showing a photograph? So there's these layers of like proof of life and these other sort of aspects that are really, really interesting. Uh, but from a functional standpoint, if you think about there's statistics around how the cash points
Mm, mm,
sped up
mm,
with the introduction of credit cards relative to cash. And that's a relatively easy one to think about of like how long does it take a cashier to create change and all of that.
mm.
We can also get additional speed out of changing away from the traditional credit cards
Hmm.
and being able to go off of biometrics like your face
That's
as well.
dangerous. That's dangerous for the consumer because it's like it just makes it that much easier to buy more. I mean,
It makes it easier to buy more,
it's not
which
dangerous.
it's easier for the store, it's easier for the
Yeah,
consumer. The the thing that oftentimes ends up getting a reaction is
yeah.
on the privacy aspect
Mm,
of it. But most people that have a current iPhone are unlocking their phone with their face.
mm,
Same thing.
yeah.
At first, when those came out, everyone said the exact same thing. Oh no, I can't believe it. But if you hear from the leaders of MasterCard, JP Morgan, Visa, all of these big organizations, when they're talking about the future of payments at the point of sale, it's moving towards biometrics. And so we've got this company, a lot of that is moving towards, is based upon the data set. So a lot of it is going to be very Western face,
Mm,
which means that the Asia market needs its own proprietary data sources so that it can actually analyze the individual faces, the differentials,
right.
etc., because it's very data set based.
Mm,
Uh, this is a company that I think has enormous potential in order to become very, very important. It's a pathway to go deeper on AI in retail,
mm.
whether physical retail, which I think that there's a big opportunity because as well, what's the next step? One of the things on the autonomous stores that they were doing was also tapping into the CCTV cameras in order to trace your behavior.
Mm.
Now with the payments, you can get the transactional. If you can tap into the behavioral with e-commerce, I can trace everything that you do the moment that you come onto my site to the moment you leave, whether you bought something or not. But with physical, you can't do that. If we can marry up the two,
Mm.
that's an immensely useful amount of information
Now that's
that
interesting.
retailers would pay for,
That's
malls would
interesting.
pay for,
No,
corporate shop lots would end up paying
no,
for.
no,
Any place that has a lot of footfall.
no, because now you're getting into how much is the shelf space worth, right?
Yeah.
You see where customers are going. You could put value on
Yeah, yeah.
locations in the store,
Yeah, yeah.
right? You can say, hey, look, your customers, 90% of your customers are loitering in this area.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you want your product in this area, you're going to have to pay more or
Yeah.
give us a better
Yeah.
deal on that product.
Think
That's interesting.
personalized
Yeah.
advertisement when you're in
Yeah.
the store, like
Well, that's
take an
Minority
example.
Report shit. That's
Yeah,
next.
yeah, yeah. You're walking through the store. I know that it's you, not because I have your name or anything, but I have like a token number that represents your identity. So you're still anonymous from like a name, social security. It's not like I can
Mm,
track you down to your house.
right.
But you're walking around the store, you come by one of these digital screens that a lot of locations have these days, and now it's going to feed you an advertisement that is exactly specific to what you most likely are looking for. Oh,
Yeah.
guess what? There's a 2-for-1 special on XYZ.
Oh yeah, that's Minority Report all the way.
Mm.
Earlier we were talking about this, right? And I said a humanoid robot would be an interesting aspect into like having a security feature within a store. If we're
Yeah.
talking about unmanned retail outlets, you still need some sort of a security presence, whether it's locking them in until
Mm.
they purchase it, to prevent theft, or
Mm.
if you're having multiple clients coming in. I said I thought a humanoid robot would be interesting. You know what else would be would be just as interesting, which is already available, are these hollow boxes, right? These like boxes that
Mm.
have like almost this three-dimensional hologram of an AI figure. A friend of mine actually is invested in that. And that could be interesting because then there's someone you can interact with
Yeah.
as well. And
Yeah.
and if your software that you're talking about is integrated into that hollow box,
Yeah.
then you actually have putting a face to your software
Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
interact with the client.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's interesting too. I always thought that that's how AI is going to evolve in retail as well, from
Yeah.
an informational standpoint. Like if it's a big box store, for
Mm.
example, you go to the hollow box. Where is this product located? Oh, you need to go to aisle 3,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
mid shelf. Halfway down the
Yeah.
aisle,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because they'll know everything because
Yeah.
everything is going to be QR coded in to its place in terms of
Mm.
inventory, so you can track it,
Yeah.
right? So in a sense, that's also dangerous for retail workers. I mean, funny, and of course,
Well,
this will all
wait,
be
wait, wait.
adapted into Western society
Yeah.
first because the retail worker is more costly, and
And scarcity of labor as well. So you may
yeah,
end up finding it in places that have aging
mm,
populations or expensive labor
yeah.
because it is going to fall into that sort of
So we're
category.
talking like Japan, Korea, Australia. The
Mm.
United States has high wages in certain
Yeah.
states. Europe, for example, has high wages in
China's
certain
going to be
states.
an early adopter on it as well.
China will
Yeah,
be
they already have
just
quite a bit.
because they're totally
Yeah.
digital, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's in the US they're already doing some dystopian shit, right? You go into some of these retail stores and there's an iPad with a Filipino worker's face on there who's essentially the cashier
Mm.
because they could pay somebody in the Philippines $3 an hour as
Mm.
opposed to $15 an hour for an
Yeah.
American worker. I've seen
Well,
videos of that in New York.
it's long been from when I used to live in the States, going back. Well, it's been like 12 years, or I can't remember the exact number of years. But it used to be that you go to a drive-through and you get to the intercom where you're not face to face with the person. They back it that long ago, they used to outsource that all to call centers.
Did they?
Yeah,
I didn't know
for a
that.
long, long time, all of those intercoms
I always thought you
used.
were talking to the guy at the window.
Back when I worked in fast food,
Yeah,
when I was a 15-year-old, and
yeah.
it was about one of my first like actual legal paying jobs. Yes, I ended up working that role.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Actually, no, they stuck me back in the kitchen flipping burgers, but I
But you
could have
saw it
worked that
happening.
job.
But
I
you saw
saw
it
that it
happening.
actually did happen.
Right. They put the
But
20-year-olds
a
in the
lot of them started outsourcing it out, and they would outsource it to fractional work because you didn't necessarily always need, and you didn't
Yeah.
always have that constant flow. So it was a way of managing the supply and demand. You now
Mm,
can take 50 different outlets
mm.
and push them all into one call center so that you can optimize your
Oh, now I can totally see
capacity
that.
utilization.
I totally see that being an LLM now.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
got to be an LLM. You can put
Now,
an
yeah.
AI face to
In
it.
the early days, they actually used there was a call center in Utah
Mm.
that they used, and then they pushed it overseas. And yeah,
Oh,
now it's basically AI.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, the AI voice is
yeah,
getting very good. I mean,
but
Grok is good.
it's very good.
OpenAI is
Yeah,
very
yeah,
good.
yeah,
The latency is quite high.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, quite low, excuse me.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
you don't really have to wait for a response as
yeah,
you
yeah,
used to.
yeah,
And what I also like about Grok, for example, is like with OpenAI, I found that it wouldn't give you enough time to complete your thought. Like if you pause for 1 or 2 seconds,
yeah. It wants to jump in.
it would jump in. Grok gives you enough time
Mm,
to actually get your entire thought out. Because when you're creating new thoughts, sometimes us non super geniuses,
yeah,
we need a little bit of time to get our thought out,
yeah, yeah.
and Grok is very good at that.
It needs one of you need to teach it the walkie-talkie
Mm,
format of like you need to say over and out
right.
or copy or something like that at the end so that it knows this is the end of my
Yeah. Speaking of
statement.
Grok, let's talk Grok for a second there
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
there've been some interesting stuff in the news lately about Grok. I've played around. I mean, have you seen it? It's unbelievable. Whereas you can customize the type
Mm,
of AI you want to speak
yeah.
to the point where there's this one option that's like sexy AI, where you
Yeah, yeah.
essentially can have like phone sex or I don't even know what you want to call it with this AI. It's nuts. Like I wanted to try to push it just to see how far, and then you have unhinged
Yeah.
where it's like you're talking to a madman,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? And it's quite interesting. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's not the controversial part. The controversial part is that Twitter and excuse me, Grok and
And X.
XAI, they're all about like freedom of speech and
Yeah.
whatever's available to you, right? So I saw recently there are some thought leaders in AI who were complaining about XAI that you can essentially learn how to make chemical weapons on Grok and all different kinds. It can take you with a step by step. And the reason behind it, they're saying, is because that's publicly available information, which technically it is. If you scrape the internet, you could, I mean, hell, you could find out how to make a nuclear reactor on the internet. People have done it. Kids have done it,
So
you know?
I'll take that with something that happened when I was young.
Mm,
So before all the school shootings that you have these days, where when I was growing up was when there was the trend around like pipe bombs
yes.
happening at schools. That was my generation, was like homemade bombs going off at school by some individual,
Sure.
right? That was all learned from the internet. So everybody was like, we can't have the internet
Right.
because kids are going to learn how to
Right.
do these terrible things. I guess my point is, yes, like the challenge with technology is always balancing around the fact that a lot of good can come, but with any good, people can always make bad out of it. So like, do we really need to shut it down?
Mm,
Or do we just need to figure out how to better parent, supervise, interact, and create better social environments to where people are less inclined?
right.
I usually use the saying like, and I didn't coin it, but I can't remember who said it. Uh, uh, a person with a full belly is less likely to fight.
That's true. That's very, very true. When you look at countries that end up in anarchy, chaos, war, it's usually because of high unemployment amongst males,
Mm,
food scarcity, and sometimes climate change.
yeah,
You know, heat, for example, is a
yeah,
very
yeah,
big one that
yeah.
that aggravates people. But to build on your point, we come from the same generation, and one of the things that I remember growing up in high school and beyond was the anarchist cookbook.
Ah, yeah,
Remember that? That's
yeah,
like
yeah,
almost pre-internet,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where you
yeah,
can learn anything
yeah, yeah,
about how to build a pipe bomb or how to survive in the forest,
yeah.
whatever, right? And that
Although I
was,
did download it from the
and
internet,
then
and
it got
a
digitized.
buddy of mine was like, the FBI is going to show up at your doorstep any moment now. They're watching you.
Right, right. Look, any great technology is a double-edged sword. It's all about how you use it. It's just
Mm,
like the same saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And that's true.
it is
That's
true.
100% true.
Um,
I mean, yes, the information is there, but what we need to do really is create a better
yeah,
society, a society where people wouldn't want to do something like that.
ideally. I mean, the unfortunate reality is kind of like the yin and yang. Every time that there's good, there's the potential for bad.
Have you ever seen this Nat Geo documentary where they went to the South Pacific to one of these islands like Tonga or Vanuatu or something
Mm,
like that, and they took these guys who were living in the jungle for their entire life within their tribe, and they never been outside that environment.
mm,
And in that society, the community, not much different than the prior the
mm,
Native Americans. Everybody's provided for. No matter who you are in the
yeah.
community, there's food, there's shelter, right? And I remember they brought them to New York City and they saw homeless people for the first time and they couldn't comprehend it. They didn't understand why these people had nowhere to live
Mm,
because in their society, everybody was provided a home. I mean, even in Amish society, for example, right? The
yeah.
community comes together and they build a home for like a newly married couple.
Yeah.
They could build a home in like 3, 4 days, these guys.
Uh,
It's quite incredible, actually.
but you do get ostracized if you don't chip in.
Right, right. You
So
have to
like
be part of it.
there is an aspect of you have to carry your weight.
Yeah, but let's face it. I mean, you look at the tax structure in Western societies or high income societies, you're essentially working 3 months out of the year for the government, right? I mean, in
At
some societies,
minimum.
you're working for 6 months out of the year. If you want to talk about France, or the UK, you're working for 5, 6 months out of the year for the
It
government.
can get to that point in the US as well. If you're self-employed, plus have to pay
Mm.
35% on top, 15% for self-employed, 35% for the top tax bracket. Then if you're in a state that has another high tax,
Bonuses are
uh,
taxed at
yeah.
45%, right? So I mean, at that rate, if you're paying that much, you are contributing. No matter if you're working for the
Mm,
government or not, you're contributing a large portion of your daily life to the greater good.
mm,
And that's why I think Doge is an amazing opportunity,
yeah, yeah.
right? Because a lot of that money
A lot of
has
it's
been
waste.
squandered.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
been squandered. I mean, it's been squandered on. I mean, some of these initiatives that Trump went off in the State of the Union was
Mm,
unbelievable. Like, transgender shows in Chile, or trying to push LGBTQ play in in Ireland, or
yeah.
it's just
I'm not saying that those things shouldn't happen, but I think that's more of what not-for-profit, donor-led organizations are designed in order to support. There are aspects from international development of like uh one of the there's a couple of US entities, since we're talking about Doge, that have helped fund airports, infrastructure, other things along those sort of lines. Those are generally investments. Uh, Grant making for foreign purposes, unless it is specific sort of like health or disaster recovery or those sort of things, I have a harder time thinking about like arts and culture
mm,
of falling into a government fundable.
yeah.
That seems like it should end up
Well,
being somewhere
well, the
else.
interesting thing about USAID is that it's very deceptive, right? It comes
I've
off
I've
as
interacted with them in the past in prior companies, and some of the people that I've dealt with are perfectly fine. So I would draw on some of the things that they funded. It seems a little bit like they've changed cultures since I interacted with them.
well. I would well let me tell you what I know about them, and
Mm,
I'd like to hear what you say because I read a very interesting book a long time ago before I came here called "The Confessions of an Economic Hitman."
good book.
Very good book. So in that book, he kind of talks about the function of U.S. aid, and
Mm,
it's essentially the empire building arm of the United States of
mm,
America. And it's basically first boots on the ground into countries for us to kind of, um, you know, display our culture,
mm.
and open doors for our corporate companies to come in, and for us to kind of bring democracy to the world.
Yeah,
That's essentially what it is. It's not really an aid organization in a sense like we're providing aid for natural disasters, or we're bringing up the lower income class to higher income class. We're going in there to really to bring our culture to the rest of the world, and we're going in there to grow
yeah,
the American dream for everybody and bring
yeah,
democracy to them.
yeah.
And so then they're the first boots on the ground. Then we bring in the corporations
Mm,
so that we can then, build our corporate empire around the world, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
Britain was a hard empire, right? Whereas America is a very soft empire. Where I like to call us a corporatocracy.
Mm,
Whereas we have Hollywood is the largest marketing machine in the world.
mm.
And what do we market? We market America. We market American culture. We market American values, right? Then let's look at McDonald's, Starbucks.
Not the entirety of America though. So like if you're getting into Hollywood, it is
It's very leftist.
yeah,
Let's
it's a segment
it's very
which
leftist.
oftentimes gives the rest of the world this misperception that the US is just one
That's more
ideology.
I would say that's
As does
also more recent
news.
times
News
though.
also doesn't give the actual picture
But I would say that's
of.
also more recent times. If we're
Mm.
talking the 20th century,
You go
Hollywood
back a little bit further and like, yeah, yeah,
was pumping the American dream,
yeah. How
right?
many people
Like,
learned English watching the TV show Friends?
yeah, exactly, right? But then Hollywood got into DEI with the whole, like, now if you want to win an Academy Award, you have to check several boxes on what kind of people are involved in the production,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
which is a bit wild.
yeah.
But outside of that, so you've got USAID comes in, then really they open the doors for energy companies, and for mineral companies, for
Um,
so that we can get
yeah,
resources in
not
a lot of
USA
companies.
specifically, but like he also talked about like World Bank, IMF, some of these international
Yeah, no,
agencies as
exactly.
well,
They all
which
work in
is
tandem. They
yeah,
they, they do. They work in tandem, and kind of China really learned from that.
yeah, yeah.
And the difference between the United States and China, particularly in recent years, is that China doesn't care who they do business with, and America's gotten a lot more picky. So
Mm,
China, with their Belt and Road Initiative, have gone everywhere throughout Africa. I
yeah.
mean, and the thing about that is they build infrastructure and they build
And my wife's
ports.
country of Colombia, she just came back and was telling me because they're building a lot of the new public transportation lines,
Mhm.
is that there's a very large population across Latin America right now.
Yeah, but some of the problems that have been with the Belt and Road Initiative, because I was in Africa working quite a while ago, is that the infrastructure that they build and these projects that they do, the quality is not there. They're doing
Mm,
it strictly to check the list on, okay, this is what we owe you. But then after a couple years, the roads start falling apart. There's no
mm,
maintenance, right? They built a highway 10 years down the line. If the locals aren't maintaining it, the Chinese aren't maintaining it, and
yeah,
those highways start to crumble. Same thing with bridges, right? You've seen
yeah,
a couple of accidents happen in
yeah,
some
yeah,
of
yeah.
these roads that are in the
Okay.
Belt and Road Initiative.
I don't know on the quality of the that. I know that I've read a few articles out of like The Economist and some other places, maybe the FT, on what they created. They coined the phrase debtor diplomacy.
Mm.
Um, which I mean, IMF has done debtor
We built that.
diplomacy. Yeah, I mean, it's so it's hard to kind of point the finger when you've got several fingers still pointing back at yourself.
Yeah, yeah. We kind
Uh,
of invented that. China's now taken a grasp of it. I mean, you look at great example of that is in Sri Lanka, where China
yeah, the
funded a
ports.
port and that port defaulted on its debt. China took over the port.
Mm,
So who's the biggest rival in the region to China? India,
mm.
right? So we know that there were clashes at the Chinese-Indian border
Yeah.
in the Northeast, but that have now apparently been, handled.
Mm.
But China has taken a very strategic military standpoint in this Belt and Road Initiative, whereas now they have a port in Sri Lanka, they've got ports in Pakistan, and they're essentially triangulating themselves around India,
Yeah.
which is a military
Or if
strategy and
if you talk
economic.
about the small islands that are around the Philippines, the clashes with the fisher boats, there was just the Navy that ended up circumventing Australia just recently, which ended up creating a lot of consternation.
Mm.
They're moving more into the Western Hemisphere across Latin America, so there's a lot of
Oh yeah.
hesitation.
Oh yeah, there's big clashes in South America in terms of
Mm.
the fishing fleet, right? I think they call it the Black Fleet, if I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
mistaken,
yeah.
and it's basically fishing vessels that there's
Yeah,
thousands of them around the
they
world.
go dark. They go into protected waters around
Yeah,
the Galapagos and these
right.
other sort of places. Yeah, yeah,
Chile's having problems with them, Ecuador's having
yeah,
problems with
yeah.
them. And the interesting thing about it is you look at manufacturing numbers in terms of like naval, right?
Mm.
China, I just heard a really interesting fact. Let me ask you this. What do you think China's manufacturing capabilities are in terms of naval warfare, in terms of building naval class ships as opposed to the US? 10 to 1, 5 to 1, 100 to 1. What do you think it is?
I would say it's definitely a multiple. I was listening to another interview where somebody was talking about how many missiles the U.S. produces, and it was significantly less than one would imagine. So I'd imagine if you're getting into naval carriers, it's a very small number that can actually be produced on an annual
Not just
basis.
naval carriers, but naval ships. Any
Yeah,
ship.
I would imagine like the number that the US could produce is probably very, very small. So like form factor to that, maybe 10 to 1.
Okay. 350 to 1.
Wow.
That's how great it is. So
Yeah.
that's why they're a
There's
real
a big
and,
manufacturing deficit,
and you know why? Because these
which may be a reason for some of the rhetoric these days of like bringing
Mm,
manufacturing back to the States is
yeah.
that
So the
yeah,
reason is
there's some worry on the dependence.
they don't have 350 to 1 naval ship stars, but what it is the Black Fleet, the fishing vessels are all built to naval specs.
Mm,
So essentially all of those ships can be converted to a naval ship if necessary.
mm,
So that's how that number skews to such a high ratio.
mm.
But 350 to 1 to the greatest military in the world is, I would say, a sleeping giant, right? We talked about that earlier. Whereas, I always remember that quote from the movie Pearl Harbor. After the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor,
Mm.
the admiral of one of the ships says, I feel that we may have just awakened a sleeping giant. And to me, in the 21st century, China is the sleeping giant. And we don't really want to awaken them. I hope that we would have learned that from World War II, because then we can start talking about robotics,
Yeah.
the robotic industry, where China is clearly leading the way, right? Companies like Unitree, for
Some
example.
great innovations happening there, but I think aside from just the tech in regards to the software side that makes it all possible,
Mm.
I think we got to keep in mind in regards to the manufacturing capability to actually scale the creation of humanoid robots or any of these sort of manufactured aspects, the manufacturing base in the US is just not as robust.
No, not yet.
Um,
Not yet. I think the hope, like I was saying earlier, the hope would be is that we could find a way to automate manufacturing.
mm,
And I think that would be our only chance at actually trying to catch up is
yeah,
if we can create robots that create other robots.
yeah, yeah.
And I just saw a video actually, but it came out of China of robots making robots. And it was
And
approved by a
that's
Chinese
that's where
government
that's where it's
entity.
going to end up
Yeah.
having to go is that you're going to essentially we're getting to the point where the manufacturing cost should end up getting driven down because we're going to have this instance of robots manufacturing robots that then end up manufacturing more robots, and they manufacture all the goods, and it's all going to be essentially dark factories that
Right.
lights are off and it's just 24/7 robots just kind of cranking stuff out, essentially robotic slave labor.
Yeah. And then the next step after that is once the robots can improve themselves.
Mm.
That's where we start getting into dangerous Skynet territory almost, right? Because
As
if it,
long as nobody starts naming their product T1000.
right,
The
right.
moment that happens.
No, but if a robot could improve itself without human interaction, which it already is essentially doing, right, in LLM sense,
Yeah.
we're I, I mean that's unknown territory. We really don't know where it will go from there.
Mm.
Uh, cheers.
Cheers again.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to my Irish friend.
At some point, maybe I'll start putting on my fake Irish accent as well.
You don't need to, man. You got the look.
I got the look. I got the look. I am 1/4 Irish.
Is that it? Wow,
Well, 1/4, that's it.
that really visualized itself. You
Yeah.
really embodied it.
Oh, there's another quarter Scottish, so I think the combination of the two.
Okay, yeah, there you go. All that northern, that a lot of them came over from like Sweden and Norway, right? Do you have any of that in you? Any Nordic?
So I never did the actual like ancestry DNA test. I just know that my grandparents on my mother's side, one was Scottish, one was Irish.
Okay,
My
okay,
father's side is German and Slavic.
okay, okay. I
You do look very European, like Nordic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You could play far, right?
It's the red hair.
I'm with the red hair. The red hair is Irish.
If you see me growing out my beard, I could look like a Viking.
Easily.
You ever watch Game of Thrones?
Yeah, of course.
The Wildling.
Oh, yeah,
What was
yeah.
his name?
Oh, fuck.
Oh, I love that guy. He's a pretty good actor. Too. He's
Yeah,
been in a few
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Yeah, I like him. I like him.
Yeah.
No, I did the DNA test a while back, and because for me it was different. Both of my parents were actually adopted,
Okay.
so my mother knew her parents.
That's an interesting combo where the two parents were both adopted and yet they came together. That's a
Yeah, they met in
the
the
probability of
orphanage.
that is probably low.
No, they met in the orphanage.
Oh, really?
No, no, I'm just kidding.
They were early. They were early.
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah,
Early adopters.
Yeah, early adopters.
no. Sometimes I
Can we
wonder.
confirm that there was two separate sets of parents?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if that was something that did bond them. But
Yeah.
no, my mother knew her side, and my family is actually American.
Yeah.
Her family came over there in the late early 1600s.
Oh, wow.
Like right after the Pilgrims,
Yeah.
and they came into Massachusetts, and then they eventually migrated to upstate New York.
Yeah.
I mean, I have an ancestor that fought in the Revolutionary War against the British
Wow.
as a lieutenant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my father's side is Eastern European / Italian.
Okay.
So
Did any of them partake in the gangs of New York that made the Leonardo DiCaprio movie?
no, they weren't in New York City. They were in
Okay,
upstate
so
New
they
York.
they weren't the Dead Rabbits or anything like
No,
that.
no.
Okay,
They,
just checking.
yeah.
Just checking.
No, they made their way from Massachusetts to upstate New York, and they acquired some land, right? I
Okay.
mean, if you're there for that long,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
would
sure,
hope
sure.
that they've got something. But
You would
they
think
didn't
so.
hold
Yeah.
on to it.
Yeah. No, my relatives don't go back so far. The grandparents were either brought over or first generation born in the U.S., so we don't trace ourselves back so far into the U.S.
No, you could actually. So it was like a great uncle of mine that did this ancestry thing, and you could
Mm,
actually go further and trace it back to the English roots. Whereas the first, like some of the first generations you can trace were from a guy named Sir John Constable, and he was like the first sheriff, constable.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the word constable came from this guy's name
Okay.
from like the year 1100 AD or
Okay.
something like that.
Okay.
So he was like the
Okay.
sheriff of Nottingham,
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's fascinating. But let's get back to AI. I think I want to talk Chinese AI, right?
Okay.
So we were
Okay.
talking since the last time we spoke, which is a while ago.
Yeah.
DeepSeek hadn't been out.
Yep.
That's an interesting technological breakthrough. I still don't think it's as good as ChatGPT or Gemini or some of the American things, but the one thing I did find fascinating about DeepSeek was that you could essentially it's open source and that you could kind of make your own AI with like a minimal setup of like six
Mm,
to $10,000. You could have your own homegrown like Jarvis,
yeah.
right? And some guys have done it with like several different Mac hard drives, and I mean, I haven't looked into it. I think it's fascinating. Ruth should probably look into it so we could have our own personal AI.
So
That'd be
they
sick.
so they used Mac Minis, which are like the small ones.
Mm,
They stacked like a few these things, and then they use their processing power to run the tape.
Mm.
mm,
Yeah, and then the latest one is this Manus, right?
yeah.
Which is essentially AI agents, another breakthrough from China. I haven't had a chance to play with it.
Mm.
Have you? What do you know about it? You know anything about it? Or
Manus,
yeah,
that it crashed because they weren't expecting that it was going to end up becoming as popular as quickly.
wow,
So they hadn't kind of accounted for the amount of people that would want to jump on it so fast.
it's free. Is
Uh,
it free? It's a free service
for now,
for now.
um,
Okay, I
from
mean,
my understanding, for now.
yeah, I mean, Ruth is building AI agents,
Yeah,
but everything is based off of a bigger system. It's very
right.
difficult.
Mm,
So because for AI agents, you need to know Python, you need to know how to code. Bechtel kind of does that for you based on the set of prompts, and then you get to use which LLM model you want to
mm,
use for transcription, for writing stuff, for replying to emails and stuff like that.
Mm.
mm.
But yeah, I've been checking out Manus. I've asked them, you need to request because they're in this
Yeah,
private
they're in
beta.
private.
So I've asked and I have not
Yeah,
gotten a reply yet. So
yeah,
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 I think the only thing with agents, it's I could see there's gonna be hesitancy from the public if you really wanted to like integrate your life because I mean, there's gonna be a small hesitancy because these companies are very small. They're not huge
yeah,
companies, right? And if you really want to integrate an agent into your life, you have to give it all of your passwords, all of your usernames, so it can control your
yeah,
email, it can control your social media,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it can buy flight tickets for you on Travelocity or whatever, right? And in that sense, you essentially have to give it credit card
yeah,
information
yeah,
too.
yeah,
I mean, for me, I think I'm gonna wait until it gets to like,
yeah,
somebody like a trusted company
yeah,
who because there's not a lot of companies that you can trust with that kind of information. Like I would say
yeah,
Apple is very good, Amazon is very good,
yeah,
but
yeah.
Apple is so far behind in the AI game. It's like somebody somebody's going to build something that has to have that trust factor.
Apple could be well positioned, but yeah. So
You think it's well positioned?
it could be,
Okay.
but yeah, they're behind. At least from what is known publicly. Apple is notorious for having a lot of secrecy, so who knows what's behind the curtain?
I don't know. I saw some leaked emails this week that said like they were really behind with the
Yeah,
Siri.
yeah. I mean, Gemini was behind until they weren't. Uh,
But Google was probably the best positioned company in the world
Well, a
for
lot of the
AI.
people that created a lot of the cool stuff left Google DeepMind in order to
Mm,
go start all this stuff. So, like, if you look at the resumes of the people that are doing some of the coolest stuff, they were like in doing it for Meta, they were doing it for Google, they were doing it like the big folks
mm,
because, like, that top talent was already somewhere, right?
mm.
Um,
So that's funny
but
you mentioned Meta. I want to talk about Meta, right? So the
yeah,
head of AI for Meta is a guy named Jan LeCun.
mm,
And I saw an interesting quote from him, interesting video from him this week, where he said he doesn't think that LLMs are going to get us to AGI, to a true artificial general intelligence,
Mm,
for the simple fact that it takes like 20 trillion or 20 trillion or 20 billion tokens, I think trillion tokens, which is essentially a word, right, in order to create these huge LLM platforms, right? And when you're talking about that 20 trillion tokens, that's essentially the entirety of the internet in words, right? And he equivocated it to a human being in their first 4 years of life receive the same amount of data through the optic lens, which then goes into the
mm,
brain in the first 4 years of life. And that would be through visualization and just basically visualizing the world. And not only just data input. Like, we know that AI now is a lot better at certain things than humans are, particularly logical
right,
sense, mathematics,
right.
right? But humans can navigate the world. We have a very strong intuitive sense. And when I think of that, I think of Tesla, because Tesla has the largest bank of visualized AI in the world, from
Yep.
their cars and the billions of miles that they've driven.
Mm,
Um, Now, I mean, also, I think some of your companies would then, like the company you were talking about, would also be contributing to that. So I
mm,
imagine they would all that would be valuable data to be able to
yeah.
sell
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
future, not only just utilize for the
yeah,
software,
yeah,
but
yeah,
also to sell that data could be
yeah.
valuable to a Tesla or somebody who's creating AI,
Mm.
humanoid robots, for example.
So no, I think this is a good point because I think if you to take the analogy to the human education and the human learning, we need to take into context the various manners
Mm.
in which an individual learns. And that really encompasses all of the senses. And so when you're talking about not just the rote memorization of data, we have visual cues that are based upon image interpretation, motion, etc. We have that contextualization that happens. That's one layer. We also have other sensory information from touch. If you look at humanoid robots, currently one of their biggest lackings
Mm.
is on sensory. There was that viral video of the robots unloading the groceries and putting it in the refrigerator, and you could see them squeeze the milk carton a little bit too tight.
Mm.
That is a very difficult one, but that's going to end up coming. We have ocular, we have nasal, we have all of the human senses that are going to go into it. And so when you think about the amount of learning that goes into a child as they progress, you're talking about the entire encompassing of all of these sensory
Mm.
factors all into one that creates that knowledge base.
Mm.
Whereas right now, a lot of the analysis is currently focusing on simply the data focused informational aspect of it. But right now we have huge leaps that are going on humanoid robots as well.
Mm.
And so there's going to be a lot of interesting things that happen there. Um, there's a guy from DeepMind that is doing AI technology to better synthesize the sense of smell. And so one of the things, he was on a podcast not too long ago, and he was talking about if you go to an airport, a bus station, or any major place, you often times have the dogs roaming around. We can recreate that with IoT devices, significantly stronger and better, that can detect all of the different scents with the same, with a lower failure rate.
That's nuts. Because dogs have such a different way of viewing the world. They essentially
Mm.
view the world through their nose
Yeah,
and through smell.
yeah.
That's fascinating.
There's a company in Thailand that is doing the exact same thing. A
Hmm.
lot of that falls into the sophistication of the sensors
Hmm.
because the sensors have to have the capability the same way that our nasal cavities have these sensors that are
Hmm.
attaching to the molecules that are in the air. The same thing ends up happening with these IoT devices that have the sensors, but then it just transforms into data, and data is a lot easier once you have that because now
Hmm.
you can train the model. But a lot of it starts coming down to the sensor technology.
Wow, that's interesting. But the smell is such an interesting one because there's a lot of things with smell that, like in humans, for example, smell works with memory,
Mm.
right? So when
Yeah.
you smell a certain smell, it invokes certain memories that you
Yeah.
have, particularly from childhood, if it comes to
Yeah.
food,
Yeah.
right? Or I know, for example, like the Shangri-La hotel chain,
Mm.
they have a certain smell in their lobby in every
Yeah.
single hotel, so that when you arrive there, it just reminds you of
And
being
it's
in a place
intentional.
of good. Exactly,
It's intentional.
it's intentional. And NASA has a smell guy, a guy
Mm.
who just smells things. And I
Yeah.
remember I once a long time ago I interviewed this was pre-podcast days. I interviewed an EMT worker, an
Mm.
ambulance worker out of New York City, right? Those people see some crazy shit. I
Yeah.
mean, Martin Scorsese made a movie about it, right?
Mm.
And she told me that she could smell liver disease when she walked into a house
Yeah.
after all these years, that it had a certain
Yeah.
smell
Yeah.
to it. There are people that could
Yeah.
smell
What they
Parkinson's,
claim that some dogs have been able to detect whether or not a person
cancer.
has cancer.
Yeah,
Now imagine that same technology being able to have applications, whether or not you're talking about detecting counterfeit goods. Is this the correct smelling leather that is
right.
used in this sort of material? Or can we manufacture a sensory experience so when I open my brand new car, it has that new car smell? Or if I go into this 5-star, 6-star hotel, if six isn't even a thing, I know some hotels love
In
to
the
add
Middle
the
East, it
stars
is.
themselves. There's 7 and 8 and however many. The creating sensory
No,
experiences.
think about the
We can
medical
have the
applications.
technology in order to be able to understand how the operation of our senses are. And it's getting to that because now we have the technology. In the old days, you had the perfumer that had just an advanced sense. Or if you think about fine dining, you had the chef that had an advanced palate. But all of
So
those are
many years.
senses that can end up being replicated. And we're starting to get to those points as well.
Hmm.
It's really interesting to start thinking about where that would go.
Yeah, imagine the medical applications. Like
Mm,
instead of a breathalyzer, you blow into something and it tells you if you have cancer, if you have Parkinson's, if you have Alzheimer's, or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's something that's quite incredible as well.
Yeah. I'm glad that we didn't have that when I was a young teenager doing things that I shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, I could tell you a lot of different things, but no, I mean, because all of this, like particularly the visual sense, like in Tesla, for example,
Mm,
right? Elon Musk made a strategic decision not to use LiDAR and to use purely visual sense of video cameras all around the car,
mm.
right? At the end of the day, all of that is mathematics. Like that
Yeah.
can all be broken down to mathematical
What
equations.
LiDAR is also expensive.
You know,
And so there was a cost consideration in regards to mass scale,
no.
and looking at it from an engineering feat in regards to what's technically feasible versus what are we actually capable of today. LiDAR that we were capable of it for some time now. A lot of what they're trying to put in, we weren't capable, but now we're getting there
Mm.
at a much cheaper rate.
So you think he's going to switch? You think
I
he's
don't
going to
think
go
he's going to
back to
switch. I
switch?
think it's
No.
going to. I think it's going to stay this trajectory of using cameras and sensors. Where that ends up going, I can't future forecast because I don't have the technical capability
Right.
in regards to where that directional is going to come. Um,
But it sounds like he's going to take all that data that he's collected from the Tesla, because he calls Teslas robots essentially, right? And he's going to move that towards Optimus.
I mean,
And Optimus is probably going to have very good real world
yeah,
capability navigation,
yeah, yeah.
right? In a sense.
It is a tech. It's not, I wouldn't look at Tesla as an automotive company. Sure, they manufacture cars, and that's what people know them for. But the primary thing that they're building is technology, and they're using cars as an intermediary in order to build the technology
Yeah.
that they want. And that may end up being the pure play on self-driving vehicle, which
Mm.
is an aspect that they're building. But a lot of that same technology has use cases as it gets applied towards some of these other projects of the humanoid robots and these other sort of applications. It's essentially the same learnings, and a lot of that same technology has multiple applications. So the
Mm.
value of the company is deeper than just, is it a Ford, GM, name your auto manufacturer?
No, they're a data company, AI company, robotics company, and the first robot is the car, the second robot is Optimus.
And a little bit politically entwined at this point in time, but I think that's just kind of a blip in the long
It's a
term.
shame because when I've seen poll numbers that say, and it's all kickback from Doge, right?
Mm.
And you see poll numbers, and in fact, the majority of the nation is for Doge, right? For cutting this spending that we were talking about
Who's
previously,
against cutting waste? Nobody, unless
right?
you're the one that's kind of a recipient of.
Because they all pay taxes.
Yeah,
You want your money to go to the
yeah,
best possible outcome.
yeah.
And this has happened before. You know,
It's
I
not the
mean,
first time.
it's
Yeah,
not the first time. It happened with
yeah,
Truman. It happened with Truman post World War II. It happened with Bill Clinton in the
yeah,
90s, the well-known Democrat who was actually the last person to
yeah,
balance
yeah,
the
yeah,
budget. And then it went, then we had 9/11 and spending went through the roof,
yeah, and COVID and all of that
and
didn't help
COVID,
well.
and 2008 bailouts.
Yeah,
But it's time for a reset.
yeah,
And that's healthy in a democracy. That's why we have a democracy. That's why we have a constitution, so
mm,
that it can continually evolve and readapt itself to the
yeah,
current situation. That was the genius of the founders, right? Is that they knew that it would that the situation would never remain
mm,
static,
mm.
that it would evolve. And that's why it's probably the most ingenious document written in the last, several in human history, the United States Constitution.
It's quite enduring. It's certainly quite enduring. Um, yeah. It's tough to say. I think the intertwining of politics to where it's like camp versus an actual conversation around the merits of what is actually going on.
Mm,
Individuals don't want waste. They want to get what they paid for, but that's not the conversation. It's left versus right. You're on that side of the fence because you're with that person.
right.
Not a matter of should we be spending our money on these things or not. If you look at homelessness, if you look at bridge infrastructure, if you look at these sort of situations that are real and present in the daily lives of people,
Mm,
everybody wants those fixed.
mm. Everybody
They
wants
would
it better.
much rather those things fixed than some random project in a foreign country that doesn't make a difference on the individual life of the people that are actually paying those taxes.
And it makes sense because America's got the greatest economy in the world. It's got, it's the land of the American dream, right? So let people dream.
Mm.
People should be able to have that standard of living.
I do get worried that the dream is breaking. It's still
Mm.
feasible, but it's generally realized more often by immigrants coming in
Mm.
than the people that are born and raised there, which is more of an aspect in regards to the complacency of the individuals and not an anti-immigrant sort of statement. It's more of a problem of there's now becoming more of an entitlement generation. And I sound like an old guy when I start talking about the changes of the mentality of generations.
Mm.
But it is seemingly supported by the data when you start looking at upward mobility, when you start looking at some of this complacency, you start looking at areas of innovation, and it's coming from people that are young and hungry and are willing to work hard for it. And anything that requires progress requires hard work.
Mm.
Nothing is easy. Nothing worth doing is easy.
No, and I think that goes back to the statement you made earlier. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to start a company, you've got to burn the boats. You're
Mm.
all in. You have to
Yeah.
live, sleep, and dream that company for the first year, first 2 years, until you have something that's viable, market, product
Mm.
fit, right? Otherwise, because look, at the end of the day, it's not just you. You have competition out there. There are 10, 15, 100 other people you're competing against, and you
Mm.
have to beat them to it. And if you don't work harder, work smarter, you're not going to do it.
And now that the barrier to entry is so low,
Exactly.
like I can go home tonight, get on some of these AI code writers and make a product, maybe not tomorrow because I'm not that good, but give me a week or two, I can create a sellable product.
Mm.
That is insane.
And
You know
people are
that
doing it,
people are doing it.
especially young people, which I
Yeah.
think is great. And you
It's
know what?
great, but it's what's going to end up happening is that it's going to make muddied waters to a certain extent, because what we're going to end up seeing is a little bit of buyer fatigue,
Hmm.
because we have a couple of competing things. We have AI generated advertising. We have AI generated content. We have AI generated salespeople. We have AI generated this, that, and the other, that is all pushing outreach to you, to them, to every single potential buyer of a software. And you're going to start getting buyer fatigue.
I get that now scrolling the internet. It feels
Yeah,
like everybody is selling something. If you're
yeah.
going through shorts or reels, which I don't like to do, but sometimes I get stuck just like
Mm,
everybody else, and it's a black hole. It just feels like everybody's selling their system. They're selling a leadership course. They're
yeah,
selling a training course. They're selling a way to make money with AI, a way to make, posts with AI. It gets annoying
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
you know, but the best are going to survive. And I think a lot of these companies are going to kind of be fly by night. I mean, we're living in the 90s. We're living in
Mm,
the 90s internet generation for AI,
yeah,
right? And most of these things end up falling to the wayside, getting sold to bigger companies
yeah,
and
yeah,
and, and vacuumed up. And the winners are gonna be huge, and the
yeah,
losers will be many.
yeah. The 90s were actually pretty cool,
Mm.
looking back.
I
Uh,
love the 90s. I mean, the 90s were interesting because it was like this confluence of like the 20th century and on the verge of the 21st century. I mean,
yeah,
you and I were the last generation of people that experienced pre-internet
yeah.
and had internet, so
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
in a
yeah,
very unique situation
yeah,
because we remember what it was like to grow up without the internet and without being able to connect to the rest of the world and just having your own little bubble.
yeah,
But semi early in life, teenage years or late teenage years, we were able to experience the internet. And I remember the first time I experienced the internet, it was
mm,
like incredible.
yeah,
It was just like this. At first, I didn't get it. At
yeah,
first, I just thought it was a giant catalog.
yeah,
I was like, this is just
yeah,
like a
yeah,
catalog that's digital. But then once you could connect to people,
yeah,
that was where it really dawned on
yeah.
me that, wow, this is
But
something
but
interesting.
we're kind of coming full circle, because now technology is kind of disintermediating some of that human connection. So if we circle back to prior conversation on AI agents and some of what that's going to end up causing, we have an aspect where it's eliminating some of the necessity of human to human interaction, because as a business owner or otherwise, my need for headcount is starting to come down.
Hmm.
If I'm thinking about from a personal use case, you referenced like access to your email and all of this.
Right.
Superhuman, which is one of the big companies in helping automate some of your email, they're in beta right now where they're just going to pre-populate the summaries of every email in your box. They're going to have pre-made emails ready to go. So when you go through it, it's already there. It's not a click of a button and wait for it or anything, because the cost to compute has now lowered so
Mm,
much
mm.
that it makes sense for them. Now, when you think about other aspects of it, like daily tasks, needing to do these sort of things, it's just lowering it down. And as we talk about uh, stretching further in regards to robotics, it used to be a conversation around white collar jobs are going to be under threat because of AI. We've kind of gone full circle where first it was blue collar jobs are going to be under threat because of
That was
robotics,
a
and
misfire.
then it gets pushed back of like, oh, now all of these knowledge jobs, because AI is going to come after them,
Mm.
and now we're going to come back because the AI evolution is going to end up driving a deflationary impact on manufacturing and robotics, to where ultimately the robots are going to create more robots, are going to create more robots, are going to create all of the rest of the stuff, and automated factories, all of these sort of things, which that's going to then come after the plumber, the gardener, the this, the that, all of these different roles. So technology is now coming back to the point to where it's disintermediating.
Mm.
And I'm curious on how we as humans are going to end up maintaining social connectivity
Mm. I tell you
in
what,
the face of all of these sort of
that's
technological
why
advances.
now I'm interested in apps that facilitate human to human IRL connectivity,
Mm,
right? I think that's getting big, right? Like I've started to see certain games pop up that are getting more and more popular, like scavenger hunts,
mm.
treasure hunts, things that bring people out into the
Yeah, yeah,
real
yeah.
world
Yeah.
and actually get them out doing
Yeah,
things. And it's
yeah.
all facilitated by a digital app
Yeah, yeah.
or a book or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
I love the idea of people building apps that bring people out into the real
Mm.
world, like geocaching, for example. That's
Yeah.
something that me and my son do
Ah,
all the
yeah, yeah,
time,
yeah.
which is essentially a real world treasure hunt.
Yeah.
A group of people around the world hide certain things in public spaces around the world, and there's an app that you can connect to that shows you where they are and gives you a hint as
Yeah.
to where it's hidden, and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to go out and find it. And that's
Yeah,
something
yeah,
me
yeah.
and my 6-year-old son
Yeah,
we
yeah.
go out and do. We've basically found everything in KL already, so
Yeah.
we're expanding our search area. But I think something like that could be very popular. I mean, Pokemon Go, for
Yeah.
example, was extremely popular when it came out. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing more of those that are bringing people together. You know,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we've done some of those games to where they're kind of like the augmented reality with my daughter of like there was a Alice in Wonderland scavenger hunt around Merdeka Square here in KL. That was a lot of fun. Ended up being me that ended up doing all of the
right?
riddles because my kids got tired. They're quite young.
But it's
But
fun.
I
It's
had
fun,
fun.
right? Regardless, it's fun. Yeah, exactly. That same thing happens with me.
I mean, any quality time with the family and all of that is a lot of fun, especially when there's a distraction of riddles and this and that.
Yeah. So if you
Uh,
c-
and a crowd.
if
There
you
was quite a lot of
entrepreneurs
people.
out there can find a way to make apps that bring your family together and bring friends and people together in the same social, I think
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
great idea. I'm all for that. I
yeah,
mean, I know you focus more on B2B,
yeah,
and
yeah.
these apps are going to be more
Well,
B2C, but
we're gonna hopefully enable the tools that
mm,
enable them to build these consumer facing.
mm,
I would
okay.
like to ask you a question. You know how you mentioned like your emails could be definitely written by AI and then you just have to say it and they'll send it to their recipients.
Mm.
So in the movie Her, have you seen the movie Her?
I have not, but I'm familiar with what
Yes.
it's
So
conceptual.
so there's a guy, so they already have AGM, which is
Yeah.
general AI, right? And the guy works as a writer for he would write people's letters
Okay.
because of the human touch. Do you think more jobs like that would pop up?
He wrote no, if I recall correctly, didn't he write greeting cards?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. I'll tell you what all right, I hear what you're saying, Ruth, and I want to build on something Kevin said about
Mm.
superhuman.
Mm.
I think the next step is we're going to eradicate email. And there will no longer be email, whereas people are just sending messages to your AI, and your AI is then giving them to you. So email, I think, will be a thing of the past in the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. It's going to start getting eradicated the
Yeah.
same way, the postal service got eradicated. And it's essentially going to be AIs
Mm.
interacting with other AIs and then communicating those messages to you in a simplistic and
Yeah.
easy form to understand.
So it's interesting that you say this. So like maybe 10 years ago, I came up with this idea that I was going to try and make. Technology didn't exist at the time period, and I wasn't sophisticated. Now the technology's there, so maybe it'll be good for somebody to create it. If you think about, and I'll do the frame of reference so that it like maybe there's a frame of reference here, but if you think about like a 1950s TV show or something like that with like the business executive, what did he have? He had a personal assistant that did a lot of like the errands and all of that, answered the phone, read the mail, and summarized everything, did like the shopping, a birthday's coming up, all of those reminders and all this and that. We're going to have that in our pocket.
Mm.
And so when you talk about not having to write emails and the AI is talking to the other AI, what is the corollary is this 1950s TV show of the personal assistant talking to the other personal assistant, doing that sort of message relaying. Now replace that with the AI being those assistants. synthesizing that information, boiling it down to where it becomes more efficient and actionable on the recipient side. And that's kind of how I view a lot of that is going to end up taking place, is that it's just taking this information funnel and boiling it down to the bullet points so that it becomes quicker, faster,
Mm.
easier.
Yeah.
And then the reverse side of it, it also starts with that small, the way that I would normally respond. So the answer is yes, put it in a more pleasant way for
Right.
the recipient, or
Right. And instead of sending it to Michael at Gmail,
Mm,
it's going to be send it to Michael OpenAI, his
yeah,
OpenAI account, and boom. Because right now, OpenAI, you're feeding information to
yeah, yeah,
OpenAI, and OpenAI is giving you an answer.
yeah, yeah,
It's not proactive.
yeah, yeah,
But once AI becomes proactive, it's going to be a totally different
yeah,
scenario. It's going to double the output of what it's currently at, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
right now we're giving it the information, it's giving us an answer.
yeah, yeah,
At some point, it's going to be receiving information and giving us
mm,
information, which
yeah.
hasn't happened yet, but that's going to be very soon. I think
I-
that's going to be very soon.
Imagine if
18
Siri
months.
or Alexa were not as bad as they actually are. Imagine if they were
Right.
actually good.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
That was
like,
so.
and you actually had like a personal assistant in your pocket that you could talk to, interact with, that basically like you're just giving instructions.
Yeah.
Underneath that, like from a tech stack standpoint, you can have like 50 different agents that are task specific
Mm,
underneath that umbrella,
yeah.
but you've got a single point of interface that then allocates that job across this workforce of AI agents.
Mm.
And it's a little bit easier conceptually a lot of times for people to think about an AI agent being a replacement for a human that would normally do the job. I'm not saying the dystopian sort of where all they're going to take our job sort of thing. I just think it's easier to understand the role and functional aspect. And then you still have this layer of like management and the allocation in regards to how you push it and how they end up communicating out, because there's still this sort of hierarchy of interaction. We're not really at
It's not there yet. No, no, we were talking about this, and you and I have spoken about this previously about creating like the first, one man $1 billion company, right?
mm,
And now with AI agents, you could essentially create a company org chart where you functionalize each position as an AI agent, and you have low level
mm,
agents that are performing a specific task that report to a managerial agent that then
yeah,
reports to a HOD, a head of department agent that then reports to you. And
mm,
then you would essentially have 5 or 6 divisions and only 4 or 5 or 5 or 6 of these agents reporting to you. So meanwhile, you've got 50, 60 agents working for you, but you're really only communicating with 5 or 6.
mm,
You're communicating with the head of marketing, you're communicating with the head of sales, you're communicating with the head of operations,
mm.
right? As long as you can create that waterfall flow, you would essentially be able to create an AI agent company. Now, the form factor that you're going to have to adapt to is that if something changes within the tasks of some of those lower agents, you're going to have to then sort of put a new function in for
Mm,
that agent, right? Like if somebody's working with a sales platform and the creators of that sales platform then have a software update and something changes, it
mm,
may screw around with that agent. So you may have to effectively put in a new rule for that
mm.
agent. But you essentially could create a 50, 60, 100 person company with just yourself and all the rest agents. And if that's not quite available now, I think it will be certainly by the end of the year.
I think so. And this comes into the aspect of humans are very creative about figuring out more work to do, because if that starts becoming so common, now every single person has that capability, and it's no longer just a layer at the top. It starts trickling down to where it
Well,
becomes more like any technology. Like you remember like the flat screen TV that you have on your wall here,
mm,
that used to cost so much money that it was only for the exclusive elite of the elite. Now that thing costs,
couple hundred
less,
bucks.
yeah, a couple $100. Not even that. Like
Mm,
it's the hourly rate of us of some folks.
mm. Yeah, yeah. But look, I mean, there were companies before us, before AI, that got acquired for billions of dollars that had like
Mm,
8 employees, like an Instagram, for example, right? How many
that's
employees did
true.
they have when they got, well, not many,
I think less than 10.
less than
Yeah.
10.
Here's another question for you. You see how a lot of debt is banked on population growth,
Okay.
right? In human resource capital.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that like AI, like world politics and banking would change very much? Because now you are basically, because to me it's like the population indicates workforce and therefore it becomes an asset. So do you think they would do the same with AI, or do you think that would be totally taken off from the financial part of like
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't quite
Let me
grasp the.
let me take that because I have an idea. I think maybe what you're saying is like, for example, let's say a country like Japan or a
Yeah.
country like Korea that's on a major downslope in terms of population growth.
Yeah.
They could be first adopters in terms of AI because they're losing population. They need someone to reconcile that loss, and they have to replace it with somebody or something, and that something could be AI.
Yes, but if we look at early adoption of technology, what age demographic is usually the early adopter of technology? So
Young.
while it may seem like the most logical is to say that AI and automation is going to be best suited for aging populations, we still have the adoption conundrum in regards to can it and will it? And so there's a big market, and I wouldn't dispute that, but it's going to take a savvy person in order to figure out the unlock on how to actually fit it in to the societies that fall into that
It'll have to be a
category.
young person
Yeah,
who's basically taking care of becoming the AI, creating an AI steward for the older
yeah,
population. But because, Ruth, I imagine we're thinking about a country like India, right? Which has a huge population and it's got a huge young population, right? I mean, how badly do they need AI if they have such a huge manpower, such a huge workforce, right?
yeah.
And at that, a low cost workforce.
I mean, when you think about the cost of domestic help, it's cheaper than here in Malaysia.
Exactly. So they may be one of the late adopters of it because they don't need it.
Yeah,
Right. Whereas first world countries, fully developed countries where wages are high and populations are decreasing, they are going to be first adopters.
but if you flip that around and say it's a young population with terrible traffic and commuting problems, you may end up having an adoption because of some of these other ancillary conditions.
Yeah, there could be different applications in different
there
scenarios.
could be
Yeah.
variable applications,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Non-existent
yeah,
applications.
yeah. There's a number of different avenues. Like I think that the biggest thing, and I don't have the answer on like single way, and I don't think that there is single way. Um, but I think from my standpoint, if I'm analyzing a company, my big thing is, do they actually have a well thought out path to market?
Right.
And so is that the aging population? Is it the young population with urban characteristics that make it prohibitively complicated to commute back and forth? Is it the excessively rural population that is a bit disconnected and doesn't have access, so they need a lot of that? It could be all of the above. I think the big thing is who's going to create the pathway to market in order to unlock those individual opportunities.
Mm.
And is it a one size fits all? Is it a generic, or is it tailored sort of pathways
Yeah.
as well? Like most technology has precedent steps to where it's most while we're talking about a lot of this sort of like conceptual what will it look like, oftentimes what the reality is that we break it down in pieces and we have to think in regards to step 1, 2, 3, and 4. I referenced a company before that is doing autonomous stores, and that's not something that I think is currently ready for a lot of adoption because refurbishing and reconditioning existing retail outlets, it has a high capex. New outlets are not coming on at such a high pace. So how do you take the same technology stack that goes into that, break it down to the individual components, and figure out a pathway to markets where you have a business today, and in the long run tomorrow, you can still end up achieving that same
Yeah.
long-term goal. A lot of technology ends up having similar sort of characteristics where we need to figure out the today with the eye on tomorrow.
Mm. And it's tough. It's tough to predict these things. I mean, we've gotten it wrong before, right? The initial thought was that AI is going to take blue collar jobs, and we got that 100% wrong where it started taking white collar jobs.
Yeah.
And like you said, now we're going to be coming full circle in the next decade or so, maybe
Yeah.
maybe 15 years. But
Maybe not that long. It seems like the advances in
Yeah.
robotics is getting a little bit crazy. Like you see robots doing kung fu in the streets and like dogs jumping around and like we're having all of these
yeah, that company in China, Unitree.
unitary, yeah.
Unbelievable. There was even a guy riding a robot as if it were like a horse.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, could you imagine soldiers riding into battle on robots the same way the cavalry used to ride into battle on horses?
I don't think we would have soldiers, frankly.
So yeah,
No,
to
we
be,
probably
to
won't.
be honest with
We
you,
won't.
we're it's unlikely that we will have human soldiers,
Yeah.
and if we do, then they're gonna end up being genetically enhanced,
Mm.
or somehow we're gonna unlock the Jedi powers to fight to fight the Clone Wars. I don't know.
Well, certainly,
Yeah.
certainly the first step before that is going to be exoskeletons to enhance their physical mobility.
And those exist. So like if you see some like tourist destinations in China that have like these long mountain hikes, they've started having for rent exoskeletons for your legs to help you go up.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, they're already putting it into
Yeah,
place in the civilian population, because I've heard stories of like people's mile, you know, their mile time going down by 25, 30% by using an exoskeleton. But for sure, the army is slowly getting replaced by robots. The last people to get replaced will probably be special operators, special forces, guys who really
Look at
need to think on
Ukraine. Most of it is drones.
Right.
Right, and this is really our first taste of the robot wars, and how scary is that?
Yeah.
Watching these videos of these guys hunkered down in bunkers and just listening to the buzzing of drones flying around doing grid patterns to try and find them.
That are being flown by who knows who from who knows where.
Yes, exactly. And the next thing is if robots aren't even capable enough to be soldiers on the battlefield, they can be remotely controlled, right? I mean, like when Tesla did that Optimus display, right? Those were all
Yeah.
remotely controlled. But even then,
So what?
and who's going to win that war? It's going to be
Yeah.
China, because A, they can manufacture them, B, they've got the people to control them, right? Have you seen the drone displays in China? I mean, I think they did one with 10,000 drones in
wild.
one display. It's unbelievable.
The vast majority of the drone manufacturing is happening there. When you look at the manufacturing base, I get some of the hesitation and like not to draw a line in regards to politics, but like when you see some of the rhetoric happening in the States in regards to bringing manufacturing home, there is an understanding because their viewpoint is on this rivalry from a competition as well as a military and potential for conflict standpoint. So the necessity to have manufacturing and to scale up that capacity is a priority from that viewpoint of the potentiality of conflict, because if it's moving towards robotic, who has the manufacturing base? You kind of have to,
And this is
if that's the
why
viewpoint.
Taiwan is such a key piece of this global, essentially game, you know, where Taiwan is such a key piece because they create Taiwan Semiconductor creates all of the chips for all of these robots, particularly in the United States, for most of the computing power around the world. And that's why, you know, America is obviously protecting them. At some point, China is going to take it over. Hopefully, the United States will be able to transfer that manufacturing capability and expertise from Taiwan to the United States. I know that TSMC is now creating a factory in Phoenix, Arizona, to try and create some of these semiconductor chips, and
Lots of
hopefully that's a
manufacturing is
start.
opening up there.
Hopefully that's a start.
Not surprisingly, a lot of manufacturing is starting to open there because it just doesn't have any choice.
Right. Right. I mean, you have to be self-sufficient. If
Mm.
in this current
In
environment,
the
in
environment,
the
yeah.
current environment, I mean, we were pushing towards a globalization, a globalized world in the early 21st century. But I think, uh, with Jack Ma being, taken out by the CCP and put into some sort of re-education camp or whatever it was. We don't know. It's
Don't know.
speculation, but he disappeared for several months. I think that scared a lot of American investors out of China. A lot, because a lot of people lost money on Baba and several other companies, and we saw that China wasn't the ally that America thought it was in terms of capitalism. Um, but but it goes to show you that there is a big difference between a socio-communist government and a capitalist government, in whereas capitalism, democracy increases at a much slower rate than a communist country, whereas a communist country can come together and rise very quickly.
Mm.
But at the same time, it can also go down very quickly. It's much more volatile
Mm.
in a sense. Whereas the checks and balances and the regulatory issues of a Western democratic society allows it to increase at a slower rate, but yet increases.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Coming back to what I said about like the person with the full belly doesn't fight.
Mm,
You have this aspect in systems like the US, especially currently, where they have not necessarily been taking care of its own society. So if you go around and go to like San Francisco was a shell of what I remember the first time I went there. The
yeah.
last time I went there, I made a wrong turn. All of a sudden, I'm in the Tenderloin district, and it's pretty terrible.
And it used to be great.
I mean, it used to be a wonderful city of culture, art, fantastic. Had some of its issues because of the residual of like the hippie generation, and you'd have some of like the homeless, but like by seeming like by choice sort of ones, not the like hunched over, looking like zombie types that you have currently. Um,
No, but the weird thing is when because the first time I went to San Fran, people told me, be careful of the homeless. And this was years ago, right?
mm,
And being a New York guy, you see homeless, right? And
yeah,
as I was growing up as a kid in New York City, there was quite a large homeless population in the late 80s,
yeah,
early 90s. You had the crack epidemic. There
yeah,
were homeless encampments back then, but Giuliani, believe it or not, came in and cleaned it up with the broken glass
yep,
theory that was made famous in the book Freakonomics.
mm,
But but the stigma about San Francisco was that the homeless were more aggressive. And I don't know why, but they
mm.
they they always were. Whereas the New York homeless were kind of just, laissez-faire. I don't know what the difference was, if it was the drugs that they were doing or if there was just a different psyche. And maybe the weather is better in San Francisco, so you attract a different kind of person. But but when we went, I mean,
I think it's the idea of consequence.
yes,
There's
right,
no consequence.
right, less
And so if
consequence.
you act out and you get aggressive, the homeless still remains the victim.
Right, right. That's a good
The
point.
person, the aggressor, remains the
Right.
victim in the scenario.
But
And even though you just got attacked or robbed or had your car smashed or even gotten stabbed, you're not the victim. It's the other person. That's a problem.
that's a big problem. And when we went, Union Square was fantastic. I mean, it
Mm.
was like the Times Square of New York, right?
Yeah.
You had Louis Vuitton, you
Yeah,
had,
yeah, yeah,
Hermes, all the biggest brands in the world were in that square. And it was a total tourist hub.
yeah.
You go there now, forget about it.
A lot of empty shops.
It's closed down, boarded up, the whole
Mm.
thing. And that goes,
Sad.
that's the government's fault.
Yeah, yeah.
That's policy.
Tech industry is there, but
Mhm.
it's moved away from a lot of those zones. So you still have SF
We're
area
in the
where tech
valley.
is happening, but then you got to move out into the valley where
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
lot
where
of it
Apple
is.
is. Yeah, yeah. Most of the guys are still in the valley, right?
Yeah,
But in San Francisco proper,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, there's an app to show you where human defecation is on the sidewalks. That's how bad it is.
I
I heard
mean,
a story.
New York has the same thing. Like I make the joke that I went nose blind after living there for so long because the moment that I came back, You smell a very pungent odor, and you don't know if it's human or dog.
Well, we talk odors. I mean, Southeast Asia is one for odors too, right? You go to Bangkok, it's hot, it's humid.
That's
There's all
true. That's
kinds of
true.
different
Yeah, yeah,
smells,
yeah,
right? But
yeah,
I heard a story about somebody who lived in San Francisco. They had a homeless person die in front of their home. They had a townhouse. They called the police. They told them. It took them 3 days to pick up the body. This person who lived in that house had to walk by a dead body on their sidewalk for 3 days before a coroner or a mortuary or somebody came to clean that up. I mean, that is unacceptable. And then,
3 days, the amount of rot
right, the amount of
in the
stench.
heat,
Mm.
because it's not a cold, like it's pleasant weather,
Mm.
but it's not preserving the remains.
No, it's not that cold.
Yeah.
And then you've got she who comes in from China,
They
for a
cleaned it up
state
for that.
visit, and
They,
they cleaned up the
uh,
entire city. And that's Gavin
which shows
Newsom.
that it can be done.
And that's Gavin Newsom for you. I mean, he is a man. He's probably the most ambitious Democrat, I would say.
Um,
But at the same time, he talks out of both sides of his mouth. I mean, he
yeah,
effectively destroyed California, and yet now he's got a podcast. He's
yeah,
trying to, he's trying to be more centered.
yeah.
It's just the man is.
So I watched clips of the one that he did with Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, okay, I saw a couple clips.
Yeah. I was not in his fan club, but I appreciated a couple of ways that he responded to certain things.
Well, I appreciate the fact that he sat down with Charlie
Uh,
Cook.
yeah. Just the fact that, just that
Right.
fact that a character that is normally associated with the more divisive and polemic
Mm.
of the party actually kind of reached across to the other side and sat down.
But this is what makes me wary, because this is a man who sees an opportunity. He sees
Mm.
his party is in disarray.
Yeah,
It's leaderless, and
yeah.
he's going to go and do something like this. So to me, he's a snake. He's a snake in the grass. He'll do anything to get votes. He'll do any. I mean, and look, this is most politicians.
That's every politician.
let's
Not-
face
not
it.
most. That's every.
But with him, it's so apparent,
Yeah.
it's so see-through. Like, if you can't see through that, and
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, you have to look at results. If you're a results-driven person, you need to look at the results. Look at California. You can go ahead and talk to Charlie Kirk on a podcast, but what's happening with the homeless situation? Have you improved that? What's happening in LA? What's happening in San Francisco?
Yeah.
That's what I want to see. I don't care if you. I like the fact that you sat down with Charlie Kirk,
Yeah.
but show me a reduction in
Results.
homelessness.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's
yeah.
what I really want to
Results.
see.
Results.
Show me that you can.
I mean,
Ugh.
I'm not in the fan club of any branch of politics, any particular party. I come up from a place where, like, it wasn't unheard of to hear the joke of, you know where to find a good politician? There's only two places you can find them. One, the mental institution, because you're checked in and you must be crazy already because it doesn't exist.
Mm.
And two, the fiction section of the library, because it's a fairy tale and you're deluding yourself. Because there's now, mind you, that's a bit extreme, but more often than not, it's an opportunism. If you look at politicians across the board, whether U.S. or other places, look at the net worth of the individuals before they go in, and look at the net worth after. And take one of the leaders of the Democrat Party, Nancy Pelosi.
Mhm.
Look at the change in net worth. Not making a lot of income, but all of a sudden becomes one of the richest people.
Her husband just happens to be one of the greatest stock traders in the history of
And
mankind.
just so happened to have no talent or capability prior.
Exactly. Have you seen the Nancy Pelosi tracker? It beats
Yeah,
the
yeah.
S&P by like 38% a
Yeah,
year. It's
yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah,
It's right up there
exactly.
with the inverse Jim Cramer tracker.
But it's true. People oftentimes people don't go in these lines of work by altruism or other. They're on the take.
Mm.
And when there is an opportunity, they do take. It's a legalized form of mobsters. In my mind, it's it's not necessarily any different, and it's not any country specific. It's just a general commentary on the occupation.
No, if you ask me, government is a legalized form of mobsters because they have a monopoly on violence. They're the only organization in the world that is allowed to murder people.
And they're
with
charging
no
protection.
and they charge a protection fee, and that protection fee goes to the citizens and the corporations that reside within the area of those borders.
Counterpoint. Mafias are not accountable, but government is. What do you guys think about it?
I think the accountability aspect is a little bit debatable because mafia has a tendency of getting hit, and
I would say
government can
the
end up being voted out. But oftentimes, the same tactics in order to maintain your place
Right.
can be considered relatively similar.
I would agree to disagree, Ruth, because the mafia is accountable in the sense that if they get caught, they go to jail, and if the United States government wants to say that there's nuclear weapons in Iraq and invade, there's no accountability. So there's a lot less accountability in government, if you ask me. If you do insider trading as a United States government senator or congressman, or for that matter, if you have to trade, you're supposed to declare your trade. Majority of them do not declare any of their trades. Do you know what the penalty is for that? $50. If you don't declare, it's $50 or something that's so small it just doesn't matter. And if you ask any of them about changing this rule, they absolutely brush it off
Yeah.
because of it's a function of power.
So what happened to America? Because when I was a kid, America was this, best country ever. Every Indian wants to go shift there, but now it's like,
Well, I would say every Indian still is shifting there. I mean, if you look at the CEOs of all the companies in America, they're gearing towards Indian. I mean,
that's
Citibank, Google, Microsoft,
that's
many.
mainly due to the brain drain because there are not many opportunities in India. That's why I'm here. Makes sense. But like, why? Like, America had this image that has been broken down. Why do you guys think that?
Look, it's been tarnished, but let's be real. I mean, the most amount of billionaires are still in the United States. The most innovation is coming out of the United States. So the United States is still doing very, very, very well on the world stage, in terms of business and economics. Has there been opportunities that have opened up in other countries? Absolutely. China for one, but if you get too big in China, you have to be careful. You have to toe the party line. If you don't toe the party line, you end up being Jack Ma. So essentially, if you're opening a large business in China, you are partners with the government. That's a fact.
What do you think of the new visa, the $5 million visa, the golden visa?
It's interesting.
I mean, I'm very curious to see how it plays out because now, mind you, the vast majority of the world's wealthy actually do reside in the U.S. And contrary to what you would automatically think, a large amount of those are actually foreign born.
But that's
so the question is, would you spend $5 million in order to be able to?
I mean, I think if you're a top Chinese entrepreneur, I think it could definitely be worth it. I
Instead
think
of Singapore?
that's a good point.
But there's
That's a
a
very
special
good.
part of it as well, where
That's a
like
good point.
The Chinese people usually look up to America in that sense, where you want to send your kids to America, send them to Ivy League.
I think that's very generationally affected to where like if you segment the population into generations, I think that's becoming lesser and lesser. So not necessarily because of what's gone on in the U.S., but more so in regards to what's gone on in China itself.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not the first. I mean, look, there's a ton of countries out there that do pay for play visas, right? And I would say
Yeah.
the most expensive one outside the U.S. that I'm aware of
$5 million's a lot.
is Austria. Austria's got a pretty high one too. Austria's like $1 million,
Yeah.
or $1.5 million bucks. That's pretty big. But then you've got Malta, which also has access to the EU. Malaysia,
got
even
Portugal, 250K euro, buy a house, and boom.
But that's not citizenship.
That's
That's a
true.
golden
That's
visa.
golden visa.
That's
yeah.
a golden visa.
But same, U.S. is golden visa. It's not a citizenship.
It's
is
not.
it?
It's a path to citizenship. Is it?
Is
I
it?
don't. I'm not sure.
I don't know the specifics.
I don't know the details on it.
Okay.
It's a path to citizenship, but it's not straight up citizenship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, 5 million's a lot. I mean, that's the other thing. What are you going to get? Are you going to get like money launderers? You're going to get, illicit black funds coming in? I don't
I mean,
know.
honestly, when they redid the MM2H here, that was basically my reaction. Was like they were going after illicit.
Well, it didn't make sense when they increased it to 40,000 a month. It made no sense
It made no
because you're not going to
sense.
come to Malaysia if you have to make 40,000 ringgit a month. You
Yeah,
come here because of the value for money.
yeah, yeah.
Malaysia offers a great lifestyle, great food, great people, but also a great value for
Well,
money.
I mean, even the amount of money that you had to put down because it wasn't like buy real estate
Yeah,
like a Portugal.
right.
If it was 250K in real estate and boom, you've got a long-term visa, no problem.
Great.
But here it was lock it up in a fixed deposit where you're basically making next to no money.
Plus, you had to show 40,000 a
And you
month.
had to show, well, they had a few iterations, but yeah,
Well,
it's like,
thankfully, the new administration has changed that and they've
mm.
revamped that, and it's definitely more feasible
Well, they made the
for
lower
people.
one much shorter as
Yeah.
well.
Well,
So
they
then
gave it
it's like,
tiers. Right. There's like a 5 year, a 10 year, and a
yeah, yeah,
15
yeah,
year silver, gold, and platinum.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
I've thought about switching mine and going into that as, instead.
yeah. And the other thing about the United States is if you become a citizen, then you're talking about global taxation, which
Yeah.
is one of the few countries that has that.
Uh,
And I actually know one or two Americans that have actually given up their
yeah,
United
I know
States
a few. I
citizenship
know a
because
few.
of that.
Yeah, yeah,
And they've changed it to Cyprus,
yeah,
Malta, Saint Kitts and
yeah,
Nevis.
yeah, yeah. Dominica.
Yeah, Dominica, right, which is very cheap, and it's like 100,000, or you buy a property, a government
Yeah, yeah,
approved real
yeah.
estate development.
Yeah, I know Americans that have set up camp in Puerto Rico or U.S. Virgin Islands or these other places so that they
Yeah,
can
I
have
mean, look at people like Jake
tax.
Paul and Logan Paul.
Yeah,
They have residency in Puerto Rico, so
yeah,
they pay 0%. Well, capital gains
yeah,
tax, whatever.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, Dubai is also a good option.
This is true.
yeah.
Dubai has zero taxes on everything.
I gotta
Zero
be honest with you.
tax.
Like Dubai is a nice place to visit, but I don't know if I could live there.
Yeah,
It's just too much of like a playground. It's like living in Las Vegas, but the Arab version.
Yeah, the summers are
Um,
brutal. The summers in Dubai are brutal. Have you ever been there in the summer?
I have.
Oh my gosh. I've never felt heat like that in my entire I
Yeah,
walked out of the hotel and it was like going into a steam room,
yeah,
which I was surprised by because I thought it would be dry heat,
yeah,
but it was
yeah,
actually moist heat and I couldn't
yeah.
believe it.
yeah. So I lived in Dubai for like a few years because my father worked there for Samsung, the system manager.
Okay.
So going to school, coming back was hectic because it's hot, then it's cold,
Yeah.
then it's hot, then it's cold. It's a cycle, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
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 the weather
yeah.
is terrible there.
And then it's flooded because they seeded the air too much.
Yeah.
That happened. That was a big one.
And they were having fun. They were riding jet skis and stuff.
Yeah, 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 yeah. They were like, no, 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 leave the Ferrari. It's okay.
No, yeah, and they've got very harsh rules on
Yeah.
loan, on repaying your loans. If you
Mm,
cannot repay your loan, you will get arrested and
mm.
sentenced to jail time. That's why there was that period of time where you had all these Ferraris and supercars abandoned at the airport because these guys, when the crash happened in '08, they couldn't afford the
Yeah,
payments.
yeah,
They had to flee and they left it at the airport because they knew they'd get arrested.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, even the emirate itself had to get bailed out by Abu Dhabi.
That's right. That's why the Burj Khalifa is the Burj Khalifa and not the Burj Dubai, which it was
Mm,
meant to be called, right? Yeah. So it's an interesting world that we're living in.
it is. It
Uh,
is.
I think we can probably wrap it up on that note. We went. I don't know how long we've gone for, but we've been killing it for like the
Wow.
last
We,
two
w-
plus
we
hours.
went for some time. We didn't kill the bottle though,
No,
so
that's
we
good.
didn't go that
That's
long.
good. We did good. We did good. We've got more St. Patty's Day celebrating after this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
if
No green beer though for
why
me.
don't you tell people where they can find you, how they can connect with you? If there's companies out there that are looking for funding in Southeast Asia, a seed round, where can they reach you?
Easiest way to reach me is on LinkedIn. You can find me, Kevin Brockland, on LinkedIn. Connect with me, shoot me a message. If you're interested to learn more about what Indelible Ventures does, you can go to our website at indelible.vc. You can find me around at almost every single tech event in and around Southeast Asia and beyond. So I'm pretty out there and present. If you're building something that is B2B tech and you think you've got a large scalable business opportunity, or even if you just want to bounce it off for some ideas, reach out to me.
All right. Thanks, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a good
Yeah,
one.
it was good. It was good.
Yeah. All right. Good.